The case of Alison Baden-Clay. Alison Baden-Clay was born on July 1, 1968 in a suburb of Brisbane. She grew up in a wealthy family and developed a love for ballet from an early age. After completing her schooling, she pursued further studies and proved herself to be an excellent student, fluent in 6 languages. In 1993, at the age of 25, Alison entered a local beauty pageant, where she impressed the audience with her ballet skills. She then began her professional career in the Human Resources Department at the Brisbane Flight Centre. Here, her career progressed rapidly after her talent was recognized by her boss. It was while working at the center that she met her future husband, Gerard. Gerard Baden-Clay was born on September 9, 1970 in Bournemouth, United Kingdom. Gerard comes from a distinguished lineage, with his great-grandfather, Robert Baden-Powell, a prominent British military leader and founder of the Scouting movement. Gerard moved to Zambia with his family when he was 1 year old, as it was the homeland of his father, Nigel Clay. They remained in Zambia for 8 years before migrating to Australia. Gerard then completed his studies in Australia, graduating with a degree in accounting. He eventually joined the Brisbane Flight Centre, where he met Alison. Gerard met Alison at the Brisbane Flight Centre, marking the beginning of their romance. They married on August 23, 1997, and then went on a trip around the world, visiting several countries including South America and Switzerland, with a temporary stay in London. When they returned to Australia, Alison returned to work at the Flight Centre, eventually being promoted to a management position. In 2002, Alison became pregnant and gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Hannah. After Hannah was born, Alison decided to focus solely on raising her children and taking care of her family. Gerard made several career changes during this time and opened a luxury real estate company in Brisbane in 2004. With the help of his parents, he invested a lot of time and effort into the business. The Gerard family had a second daughter, Sarah, born in 2004, followed by their youngest child, Ella, born in 2006. The family lived in a rented house in Brookfield, a suburb of Brisbane. Meanwhile, Alison spent most of her time looking after the girls at home. Over time, Alison began to notice that Gerard was increasingly distant from her. This eventually led to a shocking confession that he no longer loved her. Gerard's behavior towards Alison changed dramatically. He constantly criticized her, complaining about the meals she cooked and the cleanliness of the house. He called her lazy and said she was no longer attractive to him. Alison chose to remain silent in the face of these hurtful comments. In her diary, she poured out her heart, expressing her enduring love for Gerard, their frequent arguments, her feelings of guilt, and her determination to change to win his love back. Alison hid her family troubles behind a cheerful exterior, making her appear to be a warm, caring person, a devoted mother, and a loving wife. However, her family life took a difficult turn in 2011. Gerard's business suffered after the Queensland floods, resulting in a significant debt of around $1 million Australian dollars. That same year, in October, Alison discovered that Gerard was secretly having an affair with Tony McHugh, a co-worker. Gerard and Tony met in 2008 when Tony was a client, and Gerard hired her. At the time, Tony was having marital problems after 17 years of marriage, which eventually led to Tony's divorce. Tony knew Gerard was married, but Gerard said that the relationship with Alison was loveless and that he was only staying for their daughter. Gerard promised Tony a future together and that he would marry her. In October 2011, Alison discovered that Gerard was having an affair with Tony. Gerard immediately ended the relationship and severed ties with Tony by firing her from his real estate company and reconciled with Alison. Tony still harbored hopes for a future with Gerard. 4 months later, in April 2012, Tony and Gerard were talking on the phone while Tony was driving home. They discussed an upcoming real estate conference, and Gerard casually mentioned that Tony would be meeting Allison there the next day. This revelation upset Tony, causing her to question the promises he had made to her and to call him dishonest. Gerard apologized to Tony, reaffirmed his love for her, and reiterated his commitment to ending his marriage to Allison within 3 months. The following morning, April 20th, at 7:14 a.m., Gerard contacted the police in a distressed state, reporting that Allison had gone missing after going for a walk around 10 p.m. the night before. When police arrived at Gerard's home, they noticed deep, curved scratches on his face, which he claimed he had sustained while shaving. Further examination revealed small red marks on his chest, which Gerard explained were from a moth bite he had encountered while changing an outdoor light. A search of the house revealed no signs of a disturbance. Everything was in order, and the bed was made. Despite his stress, Gerard appeared calm and began getting his daughters ready for school and daycare. Police interviewed Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, who reported falling asleep after their mother turned off the lights and had not seen her since. During questioning, the crying girls described their parents as a happy and generally harmonious couple. Police searched the area and spoke to neighbors, but no one witnessed anything unusual. The only initial clues found were a small bloodstain on Allison's car and a strand of her hair in the trunk. A large-scale search operation soon followed, with rescue teams and volunteers searching woods, wells, manholes, and dams near the Allison family home. To aid the search efforts, a mannequin was placed wearing an outfit similar to Allison's last known outfit to aid the search efforts. As time went on, the chances of finding Allison alive diminished. Her friends clung to hope, not wanting to think the worst. Gerard appeared visibly upset as he tearfully pleaded with his wife to return, in front of the media. Behind the scenes, however, he instructed his lover, Tony, to keep quiet and put their relationship on hold, promising to reunite in the future. 10 days after Allison went missing, a boater made a horrifying discovery on the banks of Colorado Creek, about 8 miles from the Allison family home, on April 30th, 2012. The body was found in an advanced state of decomposition. The day after Allison's body was discovered, Gerard contacted his insurance company to inquire about filing an $800,000 life insurance claim on his wife. A medical examiner later formally identified the body as Allison Baden-Clay, 43, using dental records. Notably, Allison was still wearing the same clothes she had been wearing when she went missing. A post-mortem examination found that Allison's death was likely due to strangulation. Her death was therefore classified as a homicide, although determining the exact cause was difficult due to the advanced stage of decomposition of the body. On May 11, 2012, St. Paul's Cathedral in Brisbane held a funeral for Allison Baden-Clay, who had tragically passed away. Her husband, Gerard, was visibly overcome with emotion, crying throughout the service as he consoled his daughters and consoled Allison's parents. Hundreds of people attended the service. However, while Gerard was apparently mourning his wife's death, he was secretly communicating with his mistress, Tony, through public phone calls. He informed her of Allison's passing and urged her to keep their affair a secret from the police investigation. Meanwhile, the police began to question the story Gerard had given them. He claimed that Allison had gone for a walk around 10 p.m. and was gone when he woke up. However, conflicting evidence emerged. Police found that Gerard had charged his phone at 2 a.m. and was on his computer at 5 a.m., and forensic analysis showed that the marks on his cheeks were consistent with fingernail scratches. In addition, no blood was found on his razor. A biologist disputed Gerard's explanation of the caterpillar bites on his chest, stating that no caterpillars in the family's area could have caused such injuries. A separate expert examined Allison's hair and found 5 different types of leaves: eucalyptus, Chinese elm, myrtle, cat's claw vine, and herringbone fern. 2 of these, eucalyptus and Chinese elm, were found growing directly under the bridge where Allison's body was discovered. In addition, all 5 types of leaves and thorns were found in the Allison family's backyard. On June 13, 2012, a month after Allison's funeral, 41-year-old Gerard Baden-Clay was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. He maintained his innocence and claimed he would fight the charges and applied for bail, which was immediately denied due to concerns that he might flee. During the investigation, police spoke to Tony, who revealed their 4-year secret relationship to Gerard. It was also discovered that just days before Allison went missing, Gerard had sent Tony a letter promising to be with Tony on July 1st, further complicating the case. The prosecution's theory was that Gerard had killed his wife, Allison, to collect life insurance money and pay off debts. They believed he also planned to move on with Tony McHugh. According to their theory, a fight broke out on the evening of April 19, 2012, while Gerard and Allison were watching TV after their daughters had gone to bed. During the argument, Allison allegedly scratched Gerard's cheek, leaving her fingernails to collect DNA evidence. Unfortunately, the DNA had degraded, making it impossible to determine its source. The prosecution claimed that Gerard strangled Allison, then dragged her body through the backyard, leaving her hair tangled with leaves. Gerard placed her body in the trunk of his car and drove to a nearby river, where he dumped her body under a bridge. The prosecution believed that Gerard thought the river would wash her body away, effectively covering up his crime. Gerard then allegedly returned home, charged his phone, cleaned the house, and reported Allison missing the next morning. After finding Allison's body, Gerard hired a criminal defense attorney and went to see him. During Gerard's 2014 murder trial for Allison, prosecutors were convinced that Gerard was guilty and argued that he had killed her. However, Gerard maintained that he had nothing to do with her death. He admitted that he and Allison had argued and suggested that she may have left the house late one night because she was depressed and may have taken her own life. However, Allison's family and friends rejected this idea. They were certain that Allison would never leave her daughters, as she loved them very much. Her friends had long spoken out against Gerard, describing him as arrogant, fake, and self-centered. They believed that Allison's deep love for him blinded her to these negative traits. During the trial, excerpts from Allison's diary were presented as evidence. The diary revealed how isolated she felt and how controlling Gerard was, especially after the birth of their first child. She described feeling trapped at home and detailed several instances of Gerard's controlling behavior. This included insulting her, monitoring her conversations with a baby monitor, controlling her finances, deleting relatives' contact details from her phone and blocking their calls. After Allison's death, Gerard's attempts to make an insurance claim were rejected, with the money being withheld until the trial was over. Another important testimony came from Melissa Romano, who had never met Gerard in person but had spoken to him on the phone in 2009 about a real estate deal. She testified that after the deal was finalized, Gerard called her out of the blue, suggesting, "I'm looking for someone to kill my wife." Melissa, stunned, questioned his motives, but Gerard abruptly redirected the conversation and ended the call. This testimony played a key role in the case against Gerard, which on July 15, 2014, Gerard Baden-Clay was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 15 years. In 2015, Gerard appealed his conviction, and the court reclassified the crime to involuntary manslaughter, shortening his prison term. However, the decision sparked widespread outrage, with around 4,000 people demonstrating in support of Allison's family. In response to public sentiment, in 2016, Australia's High Court overturned the Court of Appeal's decision, reinstating the original murder conviction. As a result, Gerard will not be eligible for parole until at least 2027. During his incarceration, Gerard initially behaved like a model prisoner. However, over time, he adapted to prison life and became less restrained in his behavior, leading to an incident where he clashed with a prison guard, which resulted in a stern reprimand. Following Gerard Baden-Clay's trial, his former lover, Tony McHugh, moved to Bali, where she spent her time teaching and doing charity work. 4 years later, she moved to the United Arab Emirates to continue her education career. Tony now lives a private life, keeping her personal information private. She occasionally connects with friends on social media using a private account, as she fears that Gerard may try to find her after his release. In a recent public statement, Tony expressed remorse for her actions and clarified that she never intended to cause Allison any harm. Allison's daughters Hannah, Sarah, and Ella Baden-Clay are living with her parents. Allison's assets, including her insurance money, have been passed on to her children. After completing her university studies in 2022, Hannah has followed in her mother's footsteps by pursuing a career in dance. In memory of her sister Allison, Vanessa set up a charity to combat domestic violence and support those affected, while raising awareness of the issue. The case of Brayla Stone. Brayla Stone, a 17-year-old girl born and raised in North Little Rock, Arkansas, stands out for her fun-loving and outgoing personality. She lives in the suburb of Sherwood. Brayla is very active on social media, especially Instagram, where she attracts many followers thanks to her unique sense of humor. Despite being transgender and sometimes facing negative reactions from some people in the community, Brayla is always proud of who she is. She is not afraid to stand up for herself and oppose negative words or actions directed at her or her lifestyle. Brayla lives confidently and strongly, not letting anything stand in her way. Brayla naturally expresses her femininity in her daily life and on social media. This is shown not only through her style of dress and makeup, but also through her behavior and communication with people. She realizes that true confidence comes from accepting and loving yourself, not from trying to meet other people's expectations. Despite life's challenges, Brayla persists in pursuing her dreams and holding on to her beliefs. She hopes to one day stand in a spotlight, proudly showing her true self to the world. Brayla is a strong and admirable girl. We use the pronoun she when talking about Brayla to show respect and acknowledge her gender identity. In 2020, Brayla began a relationship with Trevone Hayes Miller, an 18-year-old who worked at a local Arby's. However, Trevone has a troubled past. Trevone was involved in a murder when he was 14 and was part of a criminal gang. In April 2016, Trevone and 2 older teens plotted to rob Brian Thompson, a 17-year-old marijuana dealer. They lured Brian to the parking lot of a local recreation center, promising to buy his merchandise. Trevone was carrying a BB gun, while one of his friends was carrying a real gun. While Brian was making the transaction, the older teen suddenly shot Brian in the neck and stole $15. The group then fled. Brian's death highlights the brutality and guilt of Trevone and his gang's actions. It is clear that Trevone was a dangerous criminal. This raises the question of why Brayla would choose to date someone like that. It is possible that Brayla did not know about Trevone's criminal past, or that there were other factors in their relationship that we do not know about. Everyone has their own preferences and choices, and sometimes relationships do not follow conventional standards. However, not all young women are attracted to men with complicated pasts. Each woman has her own criteria when choosing a partner. Some may be attracted by empathy or hope that the other person will change for the better, while others may seek stability and security in the relationship. Police found about a pound of marijuana in the car and arrested all 3 suspects within a day of the shooting. Security cameras near the scene captured their images, leading to their quick arrest. Trevone, the youngest of the group, was initially charged with murder. However, he agreed to cooperate with the investigation and was prepared to testify against his co-defendants. This resulted in his charges being reduced to armed robbery in juvenile court. Although Trevone did not have to testify because his co-defendants pleaded guilty, he was prepared to disclose text messages in court. These messages showed that Trevone was the mastermind behind the robbery plan, despite being the youngest of the group. Trevone initially planned to commit the robbery at an abandoned house they had been using as a hideout. As a result, Trevone only served a short time in juvenile detention. Two older accomplices were convicted and remain in custody. In 2019, Trevone was arrested again for robbery and impersonation. He posed as a security guard at a Walmart and attempted to rob two customers in the parking lot. A few months later, he was arrested again on weapons charges. In 2020, Trevone and Brayla had a romantic and sexual relationship for a while. Brayla was a confident transgender person but still faced social stigma. She understood that not everyone accepted her. When she began her relationship with Trevone, Brayla agreed to keep it a secret. Although Trevone knew Brayla was transgender, he still felt uncomfortable making the relationship public. He feared the negative reaction from society and the possible consequences. Instead of public his relationship with Brayla, Trevone kept the relationship a secret. Their conflict escalated when Brayla discovered that Trevone was having an affair with another woman. Feeling betrayed, Brayla threatened to expose their relationship. Trevone responded by inviting Brayla to his home and offering to pay her to keep quiet. Trevone's fear causes him to have negative thoughts. Instead of facing society and taking responsibility, he wants to eliminate Brayla to keep the secret. Trevone tells her about his intentions through a phone call. However, she does not take the threat seriously, believing that Trevone only says it when he is agitated. She tries to calm him down and hopes that things will work out on their own. After the phone call, Brayla went to Trevone's home. A friend confirmed this while talking to Brayla on the phone as she was waiting for Trevone to open the door. About 5 hours after meeting Trevone, Brayla texted the friend, saying she was unhappy and they had been arguing for hours. Sadly, this was one of the last times anyone heard from Brayla. The next morning, a passerby called the police to report a body in a park in the Sherwood area of North Little Rock. Police found Brayla's body in a black Saturn Vue on a gravel road near 7224 Vista Point Court, which overlooks Gap Creek Drive. North Little Rock police had reported Brayla missing shortly before the discovery. When police arrived on the scene, they found the body of Brayla, a 17-year-old girl, in an abandoned car on a gravel road. She had been shot to death, with a gunshot wound to the head. Brayla's body was found lying face up on the floor in front of the passenger seat, with her legs extended behind the seat. The driver's side window was broken. The police report noted that there was blood inside the car and a strong smell of bleach. Investigators also found some of the interior upholstery discolored, possibly from exposure to bleach. News of Brayla's death has been widely reported in the media. Notably, her family requested that articles about Brayla use the pronoun he and her birth name, contrary to her expressed preferences prior to her death. It was clear that there was a clear disagreement between Brayla and her family about her identity. This was demonstrated by their lack of respect for her gender identity, even after her death. In the obituary, the family used an old image of Brayla before her transition, which caused a sense of disappointment and regret. Instead of celebrating Brayla for who she was, the family chose to present a past image that she had tried to change. This reflects the difficulties in society in accepting and respecting diversity in gender identity. After Brayla passed away, an Instagram account named Tap and Season commented that they killed her for $5,000 and posted pictures of money as evidence. In the next 24 hours, this account received a lot of criticism. Finally, the account owner admitted that he was just a 15-year-old kid making up stories to get attention. This thoughtless action is not only irresponsible but also deserves strong condemnation. The baseless confession of murder has caused more grief for Brayla's family and friends and affected the whole community. Anxiety and insecurity in the community are increasing as people read the comments and wonder if there is a real killer on the loose in Sherwood. The fact that the police have not arrested the imposter has only made the situation more tense. While this child may not face legal consequences, his actions have had serious repercussions. Hopefully, as he grows up, he will realize his mistakes and learn a valuable lesson about the importance of honesty and respect for others. After a week of investigation, the police arrested Trevone. According to reports, Trevone quickly became the prime suspect in the case. A friend of Brayla provided important information to the police. Brayla was with Trevone on the night of her murder, and the location where Brayla's body was found was a place Trevone frequently went to have sex, due to its proximity to his residence in Sherwood. After Brayla's death, Trevone's manager at Arby's contacted him. During the conversation, Trevone appeared very upset and said that he had screwed everything up and would not be returning to work for a long time. Although the manager tried to ask Trevone what had happened, he only replied that she would know soon. Upon hearing that Brayla's body had been discovered, the manager immediately reported the conversation to the police. With this information and other evidence, Trevone was finally arrested on August 3rd. At trial, prosecutors alleged that Trevone had murdered Brayla to prevent her from revealing their sexual relationship. According to the indictment, Brayla had discovered that Trevone was dating another woman and planned to retaliate by making their previous intimate relationship public. Fearing that he would be labeled a homosexual, Trevone allegedly paid Brayla to keep the matter quiet. However, when he learned that Brayla was still planning to reveal the information, Trevone killed her. At the time of the murder, Trevone, who was 19 years old, was charged with murder. He called his manager at Arby's to express his remorse for his actions. "I'm in big trouble and I could be dead," Trevone said. "I screwed up and I won't be able to come back for a long time." Trevone initially faced a murder charge that could have carried a life sentence or the death penalty. However, he agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence through a deal with prosecutors. The investigation found similarities between Brayla's murder and that of 17-year-old Brian Allen Thompson. Brian was murdered in April 2016 in the parking lot of the Bill Harmon Recreation Center in Sherwood. A center employee discovered Brian dead behind the wheel, having been shot in the neck. Trevone is one of 3 teens charged with his murder. Sherwood Detective Craig Grisham noted that in both cases, the killer fired from the passenger seat, making it difficult for the victim in the driver's seat to escape. Craig also mentioned in his arrest affidavit that both murders occurred at locations Trevone was familiar with, close to his home and convenient for him to escape undetected. While Trevone did not kill Brian, he witnessed the crime from the back seat of the victim's car, according to his testimony to investigators. A Pulaski County court has convicted Trevone Hayes Miller, 20, of the murder of Brayla Stone. Brayla, 17, was shot and killed in the Sherwood neighborhood of North Little Rock on June 25, just days before her 18th birthday. Trevone was sentenced to a total of 50 years in prison, 40 years for first-degree murder and 10 years for unlawful use of a weapon. He has been in custody since his arrest. About a week after the murder, Trevone must serve at least 35 years before he can apply for parole, which means he will be 53 when he becomes eligible for early release. The plea agreement, negotiated by attorney Burke Moore and Deputy U.S. Attorney John Johnson, reduced Trevone's charge to 1 count of murder. Brayla was one of 44 transgender people in the United States murdered in 2020, the highest number ever recorded, though the actual number is likely higher, as 34 additional deaths have been reported since. Many other victims may not have been recorded due to misidentification of name or gender, or because their deaths were not fully reported. Ashley Marie Preston, a journalist and transgender activist, has spoken out about Brayla's murder and called for action. She also objected to the media using Brayla's birth name instead of her real name, despite Brayla's family requesting to use her pre-transition name and pronouns. Local groups was hold a candlelight vigil tonight at Bull Park in Little Rock to protest the incident. A Change.org petition has received more than 100,000 signatures to date. The Center for the Revolution in the Arts, a youth organization in Little Rock, describes Brayla as someone who always made space for others to be themselves. They invite mourners to wear red and purple, Brayla's favorite colors. On Facebook, the organization emphasizes the importance of honoring Brayla's memory and seeking justice for her. Brayla was not just an individual, but a shining example of dignity and courage. She faced many hardships and pressures that others can hardly understand. However, Brayla always maintained her faith and desire to live a free and happy life. The case of Susan Reinert. Susan Reinert, affectionately known as Sue, was born in 1943 in the town of Ridgeway in northwestern Pennsylvania. Her father, William Gallagher, worked as a newspaper sales manager, while her mother, Jane Gallagher, was a dedicated teacher. From an early age, Susan showed a passion for learning and a strong love of literature, suggesting that she might follow in her mother's footsteps into the field of education. While studying at Grove City College, Susan met a young Air Force recruit named Kenneth Reinert. Although their meeting was simple, it had a profound impact on her life. Susan and Kenneth's relationship deepened as they both pursued higher education. After much effort and determination, Susan graduated from college with a bachelor's degree. She continued her education, earning a master's degree in English from Pennsylvania State University. In 1965, Susan and Kenneth began their new lives after graduating from Grove City College. Because Kenneth was in the military, they had to move around a lot. They started by moving to Sacramento, California, then returned to the Northeast and lived in Rome, New York. The family even lived in Puerto Rico for a while before settling permanently in the Philadelphia area in 1971. In 1974, Susan Reinhardt, a devoted teacher and loving mother, experienced a turning point when she and Kenneth decided to divorce. The divorce was amicable, without legal disputes. Susan then became an active single mother, focusing on building a home for her two children, Karen and Michael. With her warm and friendly personality, she was well liked by her colleagues and students at Chestnut Walled Elementary School. In addition to her teaching career, Susan was actively involved with Parents Without Partners, especially in the Valley Forge program. After her mother passed away, Susan found strength and support from this organization despite her grief. Despite many challenges, she persevered through her involvement with Parents Without Partners. Susan's story took a mysterious turn. On June 22, 1979, Susan Reinhardt and her two children spent their day together. That morning, her son, Michael, had been with his father, Kenneth. That evening, they had attended a father-son baseball game. However, the game ended early when Susan picked Michael up at 8:30 p.m. That evening, Susan contacted her ex-husband's parents, Florence and John Reinert. Despite their divorce, she had maintained a good relationship with them. Susan checked the gas tank and found it was nearly full, enough for the trip to Allentown, Pennsylvania, a town about an hour's drive north. The purpose of the trip was to attend a single-parent conference and spend the weekend with her children. Susan had signed up to run a workshop there and keep the children involved in activities throughout the weekend. They planned to leave on Saturday morning and return home late Sunday. At around 9 p.m. on Friday night, Karen and Michael were playing outside, picking up hailstones left over from a summer storm. About 30 minutes later, neighbors heard Susan's orange-red Plymouth Horizon start. Minutes later, the car disappeared. Susan had left the house with her two children, possibly to visit her boyfriend before going to the conference. She was in a long-term relationship with William Bradfield, a fellow teacher. Although they tried to keep it a secret, the relationship was causing tension in Susan's marriage to Kenneth. There were even rumors that Susan and William might get married. On June 22, 1979, Susan and her children set off after visiting her boyfriend. They planned to travel to Allentown, about 49 miles north, to spend the night at a motel. However, they never arrived. Susan and her children disappeared without a trace, leaving those who knew and loved them distraught. On June 25, 1979, Susan's Plymouth hatchback was discovered in the parking lot of the Host Inn in Harrisburg, 87 miles from Allentown and 97 miles from her home. Tragically, Susan's lifeless body was found in the back of the car. The details of her agonizing death were gruesome. Her body was naked, beaten, and bound with chains, curled up in the wheel well of the car. Her hands were tied, and she had black eyes. She had been beaten with chains or tied so tightly that the chains left bruises on her back. More frighteningly, she had been injected with a fatal dose of morphine. The whereabouts of her 2 children, however, were unknown. They had seemingly disappeared without a trace. Police searched for hours. But no one had seen them, nor had any of Susan's friends or relatives seen them that weekend. So, the police began investigating further. They posted pictures of the Reinert family in newspapers for weeks, looking for any clues about the children. The investigation discovered that Susan had named William Bradfield, the man she thought she was going to marry, as the beneficiary of $730,000 in life insurance policies. This raised suspicions that her children might have been murdered so he could receive the money. However, William Bradfield had a solid alibi, as he was in Cape May, New Jersey, the weekend Susan was murdered and her children went missing. Several teachers were present and confirmed his whereabouts. The police then turned their attention to Upper Merion High School, where Susan worked, as the school was experiencing problems. Principal Jay Smith was embroiled in a scandal. He had served as principal until he was fired the previous year after being arrested at a local shopping center. In his Ford Granada, police discovered loaded handguns, a balaclava, and burglary tools. More disturbingly, a syringe containing morphine was found in the trunk. Jay had been struggling before that. His wife, Stephanie Smith, was diagnosed with malignant cancer and died in August 1979, after several hospitalizations. During this time, Stephanie Smith began keeping a diary, documenting her husband's strange behavior, which became increasingly worse. Jay became involved in intimate groups and changed sexual partners, which Stephanie Smith did not approve of, and this seemed to lead to even more disturbing behavior. In September 1977, Stephanie Huntsberger, the adult daughter of the couple, moved in with her parents along with her husband, Edward Huntsberger. They settled into the Smiths' home in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, that fall. Stephanie Smith was battling cancer, which caused turmoil in the family and seemed to increase tensions among them. Edward and Stephanie Huntsberger, Jay's daughter and son-in-law, were struggling with heroin addiction and had difficulty finding and keeping jobs before deciding to move back in with their families. Moving in with their parents was a desperate attempt to escape drugs. In early 1978, Jay Smith's daughter and son-in-law, Stephanie Huntsberger and Edward, mysteriously disappeared. They had moved in with Jay Smith and his wife just a few months earlier. They was last seen in February 1978, when they visited Edward's parents in North Wales, Pennsylvania. When they left, they promised to return soon, but then they disappeared. Their disappearance was first noticed when Edward failed to show up for a meeting with his probation officer later that month. Authorities contacted Jay Smith, the last person known to have had contact with the couple. Jay Smith told people that Edward and Stephanie Huntsberger had run away to California. He said they owed money to some drug dealers in the area and had fled to the West Coast. However, he was unable to provide any further information about the incident. Edward and Stephanie Hunsberger lived a nomadic life, so their disappearance went unnoticed for some time. Meanwhile, Jay was arrested for burglary. When police searched Jay's home, they found several suspicious items, including weapons, drugs, security uniforms, badges, and pornography. They also discovered nitric acid and office supplies stolen from a nearby school. Jay was suspected of being involved in recent armed robberies. During the burglary trial, Jay's friend William testified that they were on vacation when the robberies occurred. However, the jury did not believe this testimony. Jay had a bad reputation in Upper Merion and was known as the Prince of Darkness. Jay Smith was eventually sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison on June 25, 1979, for a series of store robberies that took place in the late 1970s. During the investigation, Jay was arrested for burglary. Although Jay was in custody, the police still considered him a prime suspect in Susan's murder and continued to investigate his past. They made a remarkable discovery. Jay's daughter and son-in-law had also disappeared under similar circumstances as Susan and her 2 children. This led the police to suspect that there might be a connection between the 2 disappearances, Susan's death and the disappearance of her children. First, Susan had been killed by a morphine overdose, and a large amount of morphine had been discovered in Jay's home several months earlier. Second, a plastic comb with Jay's identification had been found in Susan's car. The disappearance of his daughter and son-in-law closely resembled the disappearance of Susan's children. The events that unfolded in this case were shocking and left a lasting impact on the public. However, the most shocking truth was yet to be revealed. In late July 1979, about a month after Susan's body was found near Harrisburg, investigators discovered a potential motive for the horrific murder that was financial gain. On July 20, 1979, a Philadelphia attorney filed a motion to stay the execution of Susan's will in both Montgomery County and Delaware. The motion was filed on behalf of Kenneth Reinert, Susan's ex-husband, and Patrick Gallagher, her brother. The purpose of this legal action was to give both men an opportunity to review the contents of Susan's will before it was executed. They decided to file in both counties because Susan's residence in Ardmore, Pennsylvania, was near the county line, allowing her to file her will in both places. It was later discovered that just a few weeks before her death, Susan had made several significant changes to her will. She had also purchased several large life insurance policies, naming her current boyfriend, William, as the beneficiary. In the legal documents, she referred to him as her future husband. As the police investigated further, they determined that Susan's death occurred between midnight on Saturday, June 23, 1979, and midnight on Sunday, June 24, 1979. William and other teachers arrived in Cape Cod at 5 a.m. on Saturday and remained there until the afternoon of Monday, June 25th. However, it was unclear exactly where William was during the time of Susan's disappearance, casting doubt on his alibi. The investigation also revealed that Susan had withdrawn large sums of money from her account, totaling approximately $25,000, through multiple transactions due to daily limits. She told the bank staff that she intended to invest the money in high-yield investments managed by William, whom she referred to as her future husband. What Susan did not expect was that she was just one of many women in William's life. He was secretly dating several other people, including a coworker who taught English, with whom he had maintained a secret relationship for nearly 10 years. William had promised Susan that the investments would yield large returns to finance their upcoming wedding and move to England. During the investigation, investigators found fake stocks and bonds in Susan's home, which initially puzzled them. They later discovered that William had sold these fake securities to Susan and then passed them on to her. These securities were mostly related to fictitious and worthless companies, suggesting that William had been deceiving Susan for a long time. This discovery added a new dimension to the case, further clarifying William's financial motives. In March 1980, William was called to testify in a civil lawsuit. During his first appearance, he refused to answer questions directly and referred questions to his legal counsel. Although William's attorneys denied that he had taken Susan's money, they were willing to negotiate with the state to settle the matter and handle Susan's $1 million will. By June 1980, William had officially testified in court for the first time. He denied most of the allegations related to the case, insisting that his relationship with Susan was not as serious as she had told her relatives. He also denied any plans to marry Susan later that year, contrary to what Susan had shared with her close friends. William made unsubstantiated allegations about Susan's relationship with Jay Smith, the former principal of Upper Marion High School, although there was no evidence to support these claims. On the contrary, many of Susan's relatives and friends confirmed her long-term relationship with William. It should be noted that Jay Smith was in prison during the trial. William did not explain why Susan chose him as the heir to her $1 million-plus estate. Instead, he described Susan as unreliable and troubled. William also blamed Susan for her problems and claimed that he was only helping to solve her problems, especially in the civil lawsuit over the missing $25,000. In June 1980, Susan's brother and ex-husband filed a separate lawsuit. They wanted to recover the entire $450,000 insurance policy that Susan had received a few weeks before her death. The intention was to put the money in a trust fund to conduct their own investigation. The case was complicated and full of unexpected events. On February 20th, 1981, William was arrested by the police on 3 charges, 2 counts of theft and 1 count of conspiracy. He was accused of keeping $25,000 that Susan had given him to invest. William was released on bail on February 23, 1981, but his criminal trial was scheduled to begin the following month. Before the criminal trial began, the civil case was closed. It was decided that $36,000 from Susan's estate would be used to further investigate the children's clothing and settle a dispute over the remainder of her will. This prevented William from receiving any money on August 3, 1981. William's criminal trial lasted 5 days and ended with a guilty verdict on the theft charge. Delaware County District Attorney Edward Weiss then asked that William's bail be increased from $25,000 to $75,000. The reason was that they believed this sentence increased the risk of William fleeing, especially since there was a possibility that he would be charged with murder. Judge Robert A. Wright granted this request. On April 6, 1983, William was arrested by the Pennsylvania State Police on several felony charges, including 3 counts of murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, conspiracy to kidnap, and obstruction of justice. The jury concluded that William knew about the plan to kill Susan and her children and was involved in the crimes. Although Jay Smith was believed to be involved, he was not charged at the time. Part of the indictment was based on the testimony of Proctor Noel, a fellow inmate, who stated that during a game of chess, William confessed to his involvement in the murders. The arrest of William Bradfield in April 1983 was a major step in the investigation of the case. Although there was no physical evidence linking William to Susan Reinert's death or the disappearance of her children, prosecutors were confident in the case. William's previous burglary convictions and his connection to the suspected body dumping led to more serious charges in the 1980s. Jay Smith, who was serving time for other crimes, was forced to testify before a grand jury despite invoking his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. William Bradfield was also called to testify in 1984, but details of his testimony have not been released. The hearing was reportedly related to the disappearances of Stephanie Hunsberger and Edward Hunsberger, Jay's daughter and son-in-law. In April 1985, Jay was asked to provide handwriting samples to compare with old documents that might be related to the plan to kill Susan Reinert. This investigation led to Jay's arrest on June 25, 1985, exactly 6 years after Susan Reinert's body was found. Jay was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and held in custody while awaiting trial. In 1984, Joseph Wambaugh, a well-known crime author, published a book about the case. The book supported the theory that Jay was the killer. A television movie based on the book was later produced, bringing the case to national attention. Jay maintained his innocence throughout his imprisonment. He appealed and accused William Bradfield of framing him. In 1989, the court reviewed the case and found problems with the indictment, leading to a new trial in 1990. Jay waived his right to a speedy trial to allow for a more thorough investigation. In 1992, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in Jay's favor, overturning the murder conviction and finding the prosecution guilty. For the next 2 decades, the state did not retry the case, allowing Jay to live out his life in freedom. William Bradfield continued to evade liability and refused to pay the $25,000 owed to Susan Reinert's estate. The case dragged on until 1996. Jay sued the state and Joseph Wambaugh for defamation and conspiracy, but both lawsuits were dismissed. On January 16, 1998, William Bradfield, after more than 10 years in prison, was found unconscious in his cell and died of cardiac arrest. Susan's ex-husband, Kenneth Reiner, died in June 2002 without knowing the fate of his 2 missing children. Jay Smith, who was exonerated in 1992, wrote a book about his case and remarried in 2002. He died on May 12, 2009. However, the 1978 disappearance of his daughter and son-in-law, Stephanie Hunsberger and Edward Hunsberger, remains unsolved to this day. The case of Elizabeth Arellano. Elizabeth Paula Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in Fort Worth, Texas, USA. She grew up with 2 close sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna. Her biological father left and Elizabeth was very young and never contacted or cared for her. Later, her mother, Juanita, remarried Fidel. He adopted Elizabeth and her sisters, treating them as his own children. Elizabeth has a very good relationship with her stepfather, who always supports and helps her in everything. Elizabeth was a hard-working student and dreamed of becoming a doctor in the future. During high school, Elizabeth met and fell in love with Rudolph Arellano, a boy nearly 8 years younger than her. Although Elizabeth's parents felt a bit uneasy about this age difference, they did not interfere in their daughter's relationship because they saw Rudolph as a serious and trustworthy man. Shortly after graduating from high school at the age of 16, Elizabeth married Rudolph. They had 4 children together, 3 boys and 1 girl. However, Elizabeth did not want to be just a housewife. Remembering her childhood dream, she decided to pursue a career in medicine. After graduating from medical school, Elizabeth worked as a paramedic and planned to continue her studies to become a doctor. She was kind, raised in a Christian family. She regularly took her children to church and taught them to love and care for those around them. Her family and friends commented that she was sensitive and always ready to help others. On the surface, her marriage to Rudolph seemed happy and stable. However, after 13 years of marriage, their relationship began to have serious problems. Previously, Rudolph had been jealous and tried to control his wife in everything. Over time, his behavior became increasingly unacceptable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth decided to leave home with her children and move in with her parents after witnessing her husband's jealousy once again. Although Rudolph tried to reconcile, Elizabeth was tired of his hot temper. She also did not want her children to witness the constant quarrels between their parents. Therefore, she boldly filed for divorce. Just a few days after Elizabeth left with her children and filed for divorce, she suddenly disappeared under mysterious circumstances. According to friends and family, Elizabeth had previously appeared very cheerful. To relieve stress from family problems and the divorce process, she decided to go out with her colleagues to a local club after work. On Friday night, April 15, 2016, Elizabeth, then 28 years old, went out with friends at a club. There, she danced and had fun but did not drink alcohol because she had driven there and planned to drive herself home. After midnight, around the early morning of April 16th, Elizabeth drove home. After parking her car, she called a friend who had gone out with her to let her know that she had arrived safely. However, after hanging up the phone, Elizabeth mysteriously disappeared without entering the house. The next morning, Juanita, Elizabeth's mother, was very worried when she discovered that her daughter was not home. Although she knew that Elizabeth had planned to spend the evening with her friends, her daughter should have returned home a long time ago. Elizabeth was not in a habit of going out without notice, and her car was still parked outside the house, indicating that she had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, she found that it was unlocked. The keys were still in the ignition, and Elizabeth's wallet and cell phone were on the seat. Leaving personal belongings in the car open like that was completely out of her daughter's habit, which made Juanita think that something bad had happened. Without hesitation, she immediately called the police to report her daughter as missing. The police believed that they could quickly solve Elizabeth's missing person case. They still hoped that she was alive because they did not find any blood or signs of a struggle in the car. However, the investigation was more complicated than expected. The first step was to reconstruct Elizabeth's itinerary on the night of her disappearance in detail to identify and interview witnesses. Police interviewed Elizabeth's friends and co-workers who had seen her that night. They confirmed the time Elizabeth left and said she had called back to say she had arrived home safely. Elizabeth's phone contained multiple calls and text messages from her ex-husband, Rudolph, that night, but she did not answer. When police questioned Rudolph, he said Elizabeth had promised to bring the children to his house that weekend. However, she had not contacted him since then, and he thought she had changed her mind. There were still some unclear points about Rudolph's alibi. Rudolph said he had been at a local bar that night with a friend, then went home to sleep around midnight. Several people at the bar confirmed seeing he there, but no one knew for sure where he went after he left. Rudolph claimed to have returned home, but since he lived alone, no one could corroborate this. So the police have not ruled him out as a suspect. Notably, Rudolph did not appear to be upset or worried. Although he and Elizabeth were in the process of divorcing after many years of marriage and having children, it was strange that her disappearance did not seem to affect him. A strange incident occurred the night Elizabeth went missing. A fisherman called the police to report what he had witnessed. He said that around 4:30 a.m., while fishing on a highway bridge, he saw a car stop. The driver pulled out a large object that looked like a person and threw it into the water. The object appeared to have a heavy object tied to it. Due to the distance and the darkness, the fisherman could not clearly see the details or the license plate. The strong wind on the bridge also prevented him from hearing anything. Later, another witness was found. This person was walking his dog under the bridge. He did not see the incident on the bridge, but heard a terrible scream. Then he saw a large object fall from the bridge, heard a splash, and then everything went silent. Based on the testimony of the witnesses, the police decided to check the bottom of the pond near the bridge. After several hours of searching, divers discovered a body tied to a large concrete block with a rope around the neck. The body was identified as Elizabeth Arellano, who had gone missing earlier. The discovery of this body was only possible thanks to the testimony of the passerby and the fisherman. Without their information, the body might not have been found or would have been discovered only after a very long time, because the weight of the concrete block prevented the body from floating to the surface. Initially, a hypothesis was put forward that Elizabeth had voluntarily ended her life due to family problems. However, details of how the body was discovered suggest it may have been a murder. However, this theory is not credible because it contradicts two important sources of information. First, an eyewitness reported seeing someone throw Elizabeth into the water. Second, her relatives confirmed that Elizabeth had many future plans and would never do anything to harm her children and parents. Elizabeth was still alive and a piece of concrete was tied around her neck and she was thrown off the bridge. This is supported by the results of the forensic examination, which showed that she had suffocated, and by the testimony of a man who heard her screams of despair as she was thrown off the bridge. However, many questions remain unanswered about this murder. Who were the perpetrators, and what was their motive for being so cruel to a mother of many children? Robbery can be ruled out because none of Elizabeth's property was taken. Some theories suggest that the killer may have spotted Elizabeth at the club and secretly followed her home, or that someone was waiting at her home for her return. Her ex-husband, Rudolph, still insisted that he was asleep at his house on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with the crime. However, investigators were reluctant to rule Rudolph out as a suspect because he had no alibi and his behavior raised more and more questions. At the Elizabeth's funeral, he pretended to be sad. He cried by his ex-wife's coffin and said that he wished he had died instead of her or with her. His sister Elizabeth believed that his words were sincere. Rudolph also actively helped set up a charity fund to organize a farewell ceremony for his wife. However, after the funeral, when he was summoned to take a statement again, his attitude and behavior completely changed, as if nothing serious had happened in his life. After a thorough examination of CCTV footage along Elizabeth's final route, a car identical to Rudolph's was seen leaving her parents' home at around 3 a.m. A neighbor also confirmed seeing the car parked near the victim's home. Notably, the car was later spotted moving towards the bridge where she was thrown. This raised many questions. When the investigation found Rudolph's cell phone data from the night of the incident, more questions were raised. That night, he made several phone calls from different locations, near Elizabeth's workplace, then near her parents' home. He also sent several text messages to Elizabeth, trying to determine when she would be home, but received no response. Apparently, he was following Elizabeth and decided to wait for her at her parents' home. Eventually, with enough evidence gathered, the police arrested Rudolph as the prime suspect and took him to the station for further questioning. A key witness in the case was Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son. When shown the rope that had been removed from around his mother's neck, he recognized that he had seen and played with it in his father's backyard. He also remembered that there was a piece of concrete in the yard before the fence was replaced. Similar pieces of concrete were found in the trunk of Rudolph's car. The investigation revealed that Rudolph had waited for Elizabeth at her parents' house and kidnapped her before she entered the house. He forced her into the car, which had rope and concrete in the trunk. He then drove to the bridge to commit the murder. Rudolph Ariano was arrested 10 days after his ex-wife's body was found in the lake. Despite overwhelming evidence and witness testimony against him, Rudolph denied any involvement and insisted that he was home the night of the crime. For this brutal crime, Rudolph faced the death penalty. Then, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to confess and cooperate with the investigation to reduce his sentence. It was not until January 2019 that Rudolph officially pleaded guilty in court and detailed the kidnapping and murder of his ex-wife and was the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was present in court to hear the testimony, fainted. Alessandra and Giovanna, the victim's sisters, called their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph admitted to the murder but showed no remorse or guilt. He spoke coldly about his actions, without apologizing or explaining his reasons. The court sentenced Rudolph to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family said the sentence was too light, but they decided to forgive Rudolph so as not to live in hatred. Currently, Elizabeth's parents and sister are taking care of and raising her children. The case of Justine Valdez. On May 19, 2018, Justine Valdez, 24, after completing the residency permit application process, she went to the gym to work out, finishing at around 4:20 p.m. With plans to go home, her mother, Terrace, texted her to pick up some bread on the way. Justine agreed, stopping at the store before catching the 185 bus to Bray, which departed at 6:09 p.m. The bus dropped Justine off at a familiar stop near her rural home called Ainakar Village. It usually took her 15 to 20 minutes to walk home. Although it was not a difficult journey for someone as young and active as Justine, her family became worried when she did not arrive home on time. Justine often told her family where she was and when she would be home, so her mother, Terrace, grew increasingly worried as time passed without any news from her. When Terrace tried calling and texting Justine, she did not respond. This prompted Terrace to go out and look for her. While searching, she asked strangers if they had seen Justine, describing her features and the sporty outfit that made her stand out from the crowd. Although some people saw Justine getting off the bus, no one knew where she went after that. Terrace's search for her daughter ended in frustration and growing fear. She had no idea what had happened to Justine on her way home, and with each passing moment, her anxiety grew. Terrace searched the streets, looking for Justine, but still found nothing. Justine's disappearance left her mother devastated, unable to find any trace of her daughter. Terrace, desperate, contacted the police to report the situation. The police quickly took her statement and began searching for Justine. As the police searched the area, they investigated Justine's life and social connections. It was learned that she lived with her parents, Terrace and Daniel Valdez, in the quiet rural area of Nisar, Ireland. Originally from the Philippines, Justine's parents moved to Ireland in search of a better life in 2015. Despite their difficult start, her parents worked hard to support Justine's education and life. A diligent student, Justine studied accounting at university while working part-time to support herself and help her family financially. Her part-time jobs included waitressing in Bray and babysitting for local families. Her parents, who lived in the servants' quarters of a large estate, worked for a prominent family, her mother as a housekeeper and her father as a gardener. Justine was known to be responsible, hardworking, and devoted to her family. Furthermore, her limited social circle and lack of typical teenage rebellious behavior made the idea of her running away seem implausible. When police contacted people who knew Justine, no one had any information about her whereabouts. The possibility of her running away was quickly ruled out. She was extremely close to her parents and kept them updated on her daily activities. On the day she went missing, she exchanged 63 text messages with her mother. The last of which came at 6:24 p.m. when Justine got off the bus. Police trying to find Justine received a vital tip. This led them to a disturbing incident that occurred just minutes after Justine got off the bus. A female driver reported seeing a man aggressively pushing a dark-haired Asian woman, wearing tracksuit bottoms similar to Justine, into the boot of a black Nissan Qashqai. The woman and her 12-year-old son drove past the scene and immediately called the police. Shortly after, another driver witnessed a similar alarming scene. This time, the Asian woman, who appeared to be very frightened, was seen sitting in the back of the car, knocking on the window for help. The driver who witnessed the incident discussed it with his wife when he got home, and he immediately called the police at 7:20 p.m. to report a possible kidnapping. Another driver also contacted police about a Nissan driving erratically near the scene. Police quickly arrived at the location, which the woman had called them earlier. When they arrived, they found Justine's broken phone and a bag of bread left on the side of the road, raising serious concerns for her safety. After the kidnapper tried to stuff Justine into the trunk of the car, but she resisted, he forced her into the back seat and drove off to an unknown location. The suspect's black Nissan was immediately placed on the wanted list, leading to a large-scale search effort involving patrol cars and helicopters. However, the nighttime search was hampered by darkness and made no progress. The search continued as the day wore on, with police looking at witness accounts to narrow down the area where the perpetrator might be. A 40-year-old man named Mark Hennessy was identified because he matched the description of the kidnapper. Police went to his home and discovered that his wife, Nicola, did not know where he was because he had gone out drinking after work the day before. This information only added to the suspicion surrounding Mark, prompting police to investigate his background further. Mark Hennessy was a well-respected member of the community, known as a devoted husband and father to 2 young daughters, the youngest of whom was born 8 months ago in September 2017. He lived in an affluent neighborhood surrounded by other young families. His work as an estimator on construction sites provided a steady income for his family, and he had no previous run-ins with the law. However, police knew that people could often hide their true intentions behind a facade of good taste. With this in mind, the police went to the bar that Mark frequented the night before to gather more information. The staff confirmed that Mark had been there, but they said that he did not stay long. He left after drinking a beer and watching some football. Then Mark returned to the bar around midnight, his expression clearly agitated and anxious. After reviewing the security footage of the bar, the police confirmed what the staff had said. They observed Mark staying there for about 10 minutes before leaving at 5:40 p.m. Engrossed in a conversation on the phone, he quickly went to his car and drove away. Then he returned to the bar around 11 p.m. Mark returned to the bar and talked to someone he knew at the entrance for a while before leaving the bar. Police began investigating Mark's activities between 5:40 p.m. and 11 p.m. A key discovery was then made when police analyzed surveillance footage from Justine's bus route. The footage showed Mark's black Nissan following the bus, starting 30 minutes after Mark left the bar. This disturbing discovery raised further suspicions about Mark's involvement in Justine's disappearance. The search for Mark's car and the missing girl continued, and Mark became the prime suspect in Justine's abduction. Mark called his wife to say he was going away for a long time. When his family tried to convince him to turn himself in, he refused and quickly left. His parents reported to the police that they had seen Mark, and the police tried to find him. But Mark escaped. The police asked for the public's help by issuing a media appeal. They asked for anyone with knowledge of Justine, Mark, or his car to come forward. A woman who heard the appeal kept an eye out and spotted a car that looked like Mark's on the road. She followed it to Cherrywood Park and observed the driver closely, then quickly contacted the police. When the police arrived, they found a man covered in blood sitting behind the wheel of a car. Despite attempts to coax him out of the car, Mark was stubborn, brandishing a knife in a threatening manner. Faced with imminent danger, the police were forced to resort to force, resulting in Mark being shot in the shoulder. After removing him from the car, they found him conscious but still uncooperative. The police then searched the car but unfortunately did not find Justine. Mark remained silent despite being questioned several times. The medical team quickly treated him and took him to the hospital. Doctors tried to save his life, hoping that he would eventually reveal Justine's location. Unfortunately, it was discovered that the bullet had ricocheted and hit Mark in the head. Further investigation revealed a gruesome discovery. The blood on his face and body was his own, and he had several fresh stab wounds on his arms and neck. The police believe that Mark, fearing arrest, apparently used a knife from his car to attempt suicide rather than face the consequences. The police eventually caught the suspect, but instead of feeling relieved, everyone felt disappointed. They found the suspect in his car, but they still hadn't found the missing person they were looking for. A glimmer of hope came when police discovered a piece of paper at the scene. Although it was covered in blood, they could read the words "sorry" and "Peace Castle." These words suggested that this might be a clue to finding Justine. Despite this small hope, they persisted. A search was launched in a forest in South Dublin, based on a clue found near a castle. First, searchers found Justine's wallet, which contained her identification. Then, on May 21st, searchers discovered Justine's body. An autopsy revealed that she had been murdered on the night of her abduction, and that she had died from strangulation. Unfortunately, the autopsy also revealed that Justine had been sexually assaulted, adding to the brutality of her death. A toxicology report, which found trace amounts of banned substances in her system, left many questions unanswered. It is unclear how the substances entered her system or what their purpose was. However, further investigation revealed that Mark had recently consumed large amounts of these substances, adding to the mystery. It turned out that Mark was a regular user of drugs and excessive alcohol, which could have inadvertently introduced these substances into Justine's system. At the same time, Mark's family life was also beginning to fall apart due to his addiction, debt, and frequent arguments with his wife. Investigations into Mark's activities have revealed that he used the dating app Tinder to interact with multiple women and flirt with women at bars. The discovery of Mark's DNA on Justine's body further strengthened the police's suspicion that he was involved in Justine's kidnapping and murder. As the police investigated the case, they discovered that the murder was motivated by sexual desire, and Justine had unwittingly become Mark's target. He discovered Justine while he was following a bus, and took advantage of her getting off the bus, brazenly abducting her from the street without hesitation, even in the presence of multiple witnesses. An investigation into Justine and Mark's phones revealed no previous connection or communication between them. However, further analysis revealed that Mark was familiar with Justine's regular route, suggesting that her murder was premeditated. It seemed that Mark had been closely monitoring Justine's movements, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This discovery shows Mark's premeditated brutality and Justine's tragic fate. The day Justine was kidnapped, he deliberately waited at the bus stop, closely monitoring her every move, until he suddenly grabbed her. The people around were extremely shocked by this scene, as such violent crimes rarely happened in their peaceful neighborhood. Many people came to pay their condolences to Justine's family, comforting and supporting them in this time of great loss. At the funeral, heartfelt tributes were paid as white balloons floated into the sky. Some attendees wore pink t-shirts with Justine's image printed on them, a touching tribute to her memory. Justine's family decided to hold her funeral in the Philippines, her homeland, to find solace in a familiar place. Although they lived in another country for a while, they finally moved back to Ireland in 2021. By starting over in a new city and pursuing different careers, they hoped to escape the painful memories that still haunted their old home. The case of Vera Pectaliva. Vera Pectaliva was born on September 24, 1997 in Kyslov, located in Kovo Oblast. Growing up, Vera became a cheerful and creative person with a passion for singing. Her talent helped her win first place in many singing competitions while she was still in school. Although her parents, Oksana and Yevon, divorced while she was still in school, Vera maintained a close relationship with both of them. She also got along well with her stepmother and stepfather. People who knew her described Vera as a kind, positive, and gentle person. Vera surprised her family when she decided to pursue a technical education instead of a creative path after graduating from high school. She attended the State Technical University in Kovo. Although Vera lives in Kovo, she maintains a close relationship with her mother, Oksana, who lives in Kyslov, about 110 miles away. During a visit to her mother in 2016, Vera met a man her age named Vladislav Canis, commonly known as Vladislav. Unlike Vera, Vladislav did not set goals in life, was withdrawn, and had a volatile temper. Vladislav dropped out of school after the 9th grade and grew up in a dysfunctional family. His mother left home, so he lived with his father. However, the difficulties in his life did not stop there. His father had problems with the law, and it all culminated in his suicide, all before Vladislav's eyes. This left a lasting impact on him. Despite their very different backgrounds, Vera developed strong feelings for Vladislav, loving him deeply. Vera's parents knew Vladislav and were against their relationship. Although they felt sorry for Vladislav for his difficult life, they envisioned a different life for Vera. "We did not approve of her choice, expecting her to eventually end the relationship," said her mother, Oksana. Vera's father asked her to break up with Vladislav when he found out about their relationship, but Vera refused. Instead, she simply stopped talking about him to her parents. Vera's mother, Oksana, remembers that Vladislav was never present at family gatherings and never appeared in Vera's social media photos, as if Vera was deliberately trying to hide him. It is worth noting that in 2019, Vera and Vladislav began living together in Kovo. Vera's parents supported them financially by helping to pay the rent for the apartment. At that time, Vladislav was unemployed and relied on Vera for financial support. She was not only beautiful and intelligent, but also financially stable. The relationship between Vladislav and Vera became strained due to Vladislav's excessive drinking, and he showed no signs of stopping. Vera's parents suspected that he was abusing their daughter. In November 2019, Vera decided to end the relationship. However, Vladislav refused to accept this and did not want it to end. Vladislav was supposed to be the one to move out, but he had no intention of doing so. He wanted to enjoy the benefits of living off someone else. 3 minutes later, Vera sent a new voice message to her friend, asking her to come help Vera move. However, before Vera could finish her sentence, Vladislav interrupted, firmly stating, "No, no one is coming in here," implying that he did not approve of her friend coming to their apartment to help her move. At around 5:15 p.m., Vera quietly asked her friend to come over, presumably because she needed help. Vera spoke softly, presumably so that Vladislav would not hear. 10 minutes later, at 5:25 p.m., Vera sent another voice message. This time, Vladislav responded loudly, telling Vera's friend not to come over and to wait for Vera to text her. Nearly 2 hours later, at 7:19 p.m., Vladislav took control of Vera's phone, sending a voice message himself. From that point on, Vera no longer had access to her phone and was left alone with Vladislav. At 3 a.m., a commotion broke out when the neighbors on the same floor were awakened by terrifying screams coming from apartment 738. A witness described the scene as a massacre, vividly recounting the horrors unfolding before their eyes. The screams were deafening, attracting a crowd of 15 people to the hallway near the apartment. Vladislav's brother was among them. He had heard Vladislav say that he was going to kill Vera. The brother realized that immediate intervention was needed. However, the iron door of the apartment was a formidable barrier. The neighbors began looking for tools that would allow them to break down the door and stop the unfolding tragedy. All this time, Vera's screams of pain continued to be heard from the apartment. A serious incident occurred when the police failed to respond promptly to emergency calls. At around 3 a.m., people called the emergency services after witnessing a traumatic situation involving Vera and her ex-boyfriend, Vladislav. Despite receiving numerous calls, the police did not arrive at the scene until 6:30 a.m., 3.5 hours later. Vera's neighbors, desperate for help, called the emergency services 7 times. As Vera fought for her life, but no one came. The last words that the neighbors heard from Vladislav were, "Vera, forgive me, I love you very much." As the situation escalated, the neighbors found a crowbar in a nearby parking lot and broke down Vera's door. Unfortunately, they were met with a tragic scene. Vera was lying motionless, while Vladislav was found drunk in the bathroom. And the neighbors tried in vain to get help from the police. Operator 112 were socializing, laughing and drinking tea while discussing their lives, and were very unhappy that they were disturbed. Police arrived at the scene only after being informed that Vera had died. They initially blamed their delayed response on a lack of fuel in one of their vehicles and not enough officers on duty due to other emergencies. The operator, 112, and the police officer on duty that night were both brought to trial. Police station footage was released during the investigation, revealing their indifferent attitude. Vladislav's testimony confirmed that there was no conflict between him and Vera until 5 a.m. Vladislav recalled an argument with Vera on December 15, 2019, which occurred because he wanted to go to a nightclub, but she refused. This incident was not the beginning of their problems, as Vera had mentioned ending their relationship a month earlier. She also began to spend more time with Kaislav and less time with him. Vladislav also found out from a mutual friend that Vera was in a relationship with another man named Alexander, from Kaislav. Although he did not know Alexander, Vladislav still wanted to discuss this with Vera. Despite the tension between them, they still lived in the same apartment and kept in touch by phone. After an argument on December 15, 2019, Vera left the apartment, taking some of her belongings with her. On January 12, 2020, he contacted Vera to offer to help her move the rest of her belongings to a new apartment. She accepted his offer and they planned to meet the next day to complete the move. Vera scheduled a meeting with him on the afternoon of January 13, 2020, so they could pick up her belongings and transport them to her new apartment. However, his plan was not just to help Vera move, he also intended to move out, as he did not want to continue living in the apartment without her. When Vera arrived on January 13, 2020, between 4 o'clock and 6 p.m., we decided to pack both of our belongings, making it a joint move. On January 14, 2020, they consumed a large amount of alcohol, including beer, spirits, and vodka, while packing. By about 5 a.m., I was drunk, and so was Vera. Initially, there were no problems between them. However, things changed when he brought up their past relationship and told her that he knew she was seeing someone else. Vera felt offended by this, and the conversation escalated into a heated argument. She became aggressive, used foul language, and physically assaulted him. Specifically, she kicked him several times in the groin and hit him several times in the face with the palm of her hand. The slaps did not cause him significant pain, but the kicks to the groin did. Vera started a fight, which angered him. He was angry not only at her attacks, but also at her dishonesty about dating other people and accusations that he had crossed the line when discussing her personal life. During this time, Vladislav claimed that Vera continued to insult him, which was the story he told the police. However, the medical examination showed that he was lying. Vera's fatal injuries did not occur at the time of her death, but 6 hours earlier, around midnight. This timeline indicated that Vladislav had repeatedly beaten and injured Vera in the 6 hours before she died from her injuries. The examination found approximately 100 injuries on her body, including stab wounds, a broken nose, broken ribs, and signs of strangulation on her neck. After this tragic incident, Vera's funeral attracted more than 1,000 mourners, but the church was too small to accommodate everyone. Vera's grieving mother, Oksana, revealed that the funeral home spent 4 hours trying to recreate her daughter's severely damaged face using cosmetics. Despite these efforts, Oksana could barely recognize her own child, such was the severity of her injuries. Meanwhile, Vladislav was telling the police his story of what had happened. Of course, he tried to downplay his role in the crime. In addition, the presence of Vladislav's brother at the crime scene raised many questions, since he lived in another city. Vladislav gave an explanation for his brother's involvement. According to Vladislav, after the incident, he contacted his brother and informed him that Vera was no longer breathing. His brother advised him to call an ambulance and attempt artificial respiration and first aid on Vera. However, phone records show that Vladislav called his brother around midnight and said that he intended to kill Vera. During the interrogation, he was questioned about the injuries on Vera's body. In response, he said that it was likely that he had inflicted them, although he did not remember how many times he had hit her. The injuries recorded by the expert could have been inflicted by him. He admitted to having inflicted all the injuries listed in the report. During the altercation, his main goal was to achieve silence, and he did not consider Vera's pain. Vera screamed and insulted him throughout the fight. He made it clear that he did not feel pleasure in hitting her. Instead, he wanted her to stop screaming. And the investigation found that the police and emergency services personnel were negligent. Despite this, they were not suspended during the investigation and continued to defend their actions. The prosecutor pushed for actual prison sentences for the 5 defendants, but the judge decided to reduce the sentences from 1.5 years to 2 years of suspended imprisonment. Along with the sentence, the court ordered each police officer to pay about $350 to the victim. The police department was also ordered to pay about $111,000. Russia has its own currency, the ruble, but I have converted all the amounts to US dollars so that everyone can understand these numbers. The indictment states that the police had gasoline, and even if they did not, they should have taken appropriate measures to resolve the situation. Furthermore, the police refused to cooperate with the investigation and did not take responsibility for their actions. According to their account, when witnesses reported hearing a woman's desperate cries for help, the police team was in another location investigating the discovery of a man's body. We will probably never know what really happened that night. Vera had planned to move out of the apartment and even asked a friend to help. With this, it can be assumed that Vladislav forced Vera to drink alcohol or poured alcohol into her mouth while she was unconscious. This gave him time to fabricate a story that portrayed the events as unintentional. In 2022, the court sentenced Vladislav Canis to 17 years in prison. Although Vladislav admitted partial guilt and was ordered to pay about $45,000 in compensation, Vera's parents were shocked by the outcome. They felt that 17 years was too light a sentence and planned to appeal. However, their efforts were soon in vain. Vladislav did not even serve a year in prison. In April 2023, it became known that he had received a presidential pardon after 6 months of participating in the armed conflict. You all know what kind of conflict Russia is currently involved in. He was also exempted from paying any compensation to Vera's parents. In November 2023, photos of Vladislav in military uniform appeared on social media. Vera's case has caused widespread outrage in Russia. The news of Vladislav's pardon was no less resounding. Here is what the Russian presidential press secretary had to say on the matter. The pardon process consists of several steps. First, the convicted person must publicly admit his guilt. This initial decision is made by the Federal Penitentiary Service, followed by reviews at the regional and federal levels, and then by the Central Committee. Only after passing these stages does the president take up the case for consideration. In addition, convicted people, including those who committed serious crimes, can be redeemed through their bravery on the battlefield, risking their lives under fire. This can be seen as a way for them to atone for their past mistakes. Imagine the painful emotions Vera's parents must have gone through when they learned that the person responsible for taking their daughter's life had been given a second chance. In stark contrast, Vera will never have the chance to start over, as her life was tragically cut short, leaving her with no chance of redemption. The case of Brandon Duran. Brandon Duran was born in 1980 in San Diego, California. Brandon's father was a motorcycle enthusiast and a former member of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, which the FBI considers to be the second largest criminal organization in the world after the Hells Angels. Brandon's parents divorced when he was around 10 years old, but they remained on good terms and shared the responsibility of raising their son. Growing up, Brandon developed a passion for motorcycles similar to his father's. At the age of 25, he had his own motorcycle, which he built himself and cherished greatly. Brandon's life took a difficult turn in April 2005 when his father passed away suddenly. In order to cope with his growing depression, Brandon felt the need for a change. He embarked on a new adventure by traveling to Las Vegas on his motorcycle. Living in Vegas for about a year, he met Amber Andrews, a 24-year-old woman who helped him forget all his problems. A whirlwind romance between them led to marriage 2 months after they met. At this time, Amber was pregnant, and in December 2006, she gave birth to Brandon's son, Brando. The birth of a child marked an important turning point in Brandon's life. He became a caring, responsible father and husband, prioritizing family over personal interests and pursuing a well-paid job. In contrast, Amber's life remained unchanged. She continued to prioritize her social life, regularly attending biker gatherings and parties, seemingly unaffected by the arrival of the child. As a result, the relationship between Brandon and Amber began to deteriorate rapidly, often leading to heated arguments. The breakdown of their relationship eventually culminated in a divorce 4 years after their wedding. Brandon was granted full custody of their son, largely due to his ability to provide a stable life for himself and his son, a prospect that Amber could not provide. After the divorce was finalized in 2010, Amber returned to her hometown of Meeker, Oklahoma, while Brandon returned to San Diego with their son. Brandon was happy to be reunited with his family, who had helped him raise his son. Gradually, the emotional wounds from the broken marriage began to heal, and Brandon was optimistic about the future again. However, in the summer of 2012, he saw Amber at his doorstep. His ex-wife wanted to reunite, asking him to give their relationship another chance. The emotions that Brandon had tried to suppress resurfaced. He believed in his ex-wife's sincerity and agreed to start over. Their son, Brando, was getting ready to start kindergarten, and Amber asked the three of them to go to Oklahoma to visit her parents, who wanted to meet their grandson. Brandon agreed, and they began preparing for the trip, planning to stay in Oklahoma for about a week. A few days before Brandon, Amber, and their son returned to San Diego, Van Emblom contacted the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Emblom reported that his friend had asked for help removing a body, saying it was that of Brandon Duran. The person who asked Emblom for help was Justin Hammer, 30, of Garvin County. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation contacted the local sheriff's office about a potential crime, which prompted the sheriff and his assistant to go to the farm owned by Justin. The police also contacted Brandon's relatives in San Diego, who reported that they had not heard from Brandon for several days. Police decided not to share details with Brandon's family until they verified the information provided by Emblom. During questioning, Justin unexpectedly confessed to killing Brandon Duran. However, Justin claimed he acted in self-defense, describing Brandon as a fearsome biker gang member who had threatened him. According to Justin, on August 7th, Brandon drove up to his house on his motorcycle, kicked the door open with his foot, went inside, and began threatening him. Justin claimed to have a close relationship with Amber, and this appears to be the motive for Brandon's visit. He told Justin that he needed to stay away from Amber, warning him that if he did not comply, Brandon's friends from a biker club would make him disappear forever. Brandon also threatened to harm Justin's relatives if he did not comply. In response to these threats, Justin allegedly grabbed a nearby handgun and fired. After Brandon died, Justin feared retaliation from the motorcycle club and decided not to contact the police. Instead, he chose to conceal evidence of the incident. Justin moved the body to the bathroom, where he used a saw to dismember it, then placed the remains in 5 paint buckets and covered them with cement. However, the weight of the buckets, made heavier by the cement, made them too heavy for Justin to load into his pickup truck by himself. He asked his friend Emblem for help, who assisted him but then immediately reported Justin to the police and left the scene. Justin then drove to his farm and dumped the buckets in a small pond. After disposing of the body, Justin cleaned the house thoroughly. Then burned all the cleaning supplies, gloves, and rags he had used. To dispose of Brandon's motorcycle, Justin gave it to a relative, who unwittingly disassembled it for spare parts, unaware of its origin. Police arrived at Meeker to inform Amber of the tragic news after 5 sunken buckets were recovered from the pond. She was shocked to learn that Brandon had died, although they had been separated, but the couple had planned to reunite and start living together again. Amber explained that she had argued with Brandon the day before, which was triggered by Brandon finding out about her relationship with Justin. After their confrontation, Brandon rode off on his motorcycle, vowing to take matters into his own hands and confront her lover. This account of events initially seemed plausible, but a new twist soon emerged in the case. Criminologists investigating Justin's home discovered new evidence that contradicted his account. Justin initially claimed that Brandon had kicked the door in, but later discovered that the door had actually been kicked in from the inside. Shoe prints on the door matched the soles of Justin's sneakers, indicating that Justin had kicked the door in. Further discoveries included a gun safe containing a list of items needed to dispose of a body, along with a pistol and shotgun. This finding suggested that the crime may have been premeditated rather than a spontaneous act. Additionally, a dog house removed from the pond was found to be filled with cement, containing debris that did not fit into the 5 buckets previously found. Justin was charged with first-degree murder based on the evidence collected. A forensic pathologist analyzed 25 pieces of Brandon's body and determined that he had been shot 4 times in the head. The autopsy revealed that Brandon had been shot 3 times with a pistol and once with a shotgun, with the shotgun being the last shot. According to the expert, the gunshot wound occurred after Brandon was already dead and lying on the floor. However, this contradicted Justin's testimony, which stated that he had only fired 1 shot with the shotgun. Police found Justin's testimony suspicious because he did not explain why he would use a shotgun after firing 3 shots with the pistol, especially after Brandon was already dead. This inconsistency raised many questions and suggested that someone else was involved in the crime. The news of Brandon's death shocked his mother, Cindy, when the police called her. After regaining her composure, Cindy explained that Brandon had never been affiliated with the Bandito Motorcycle Club. She attributed Brandon's interest in motorcycles to his father, who shared his passion with his son. However, Cindy's story revealed an interesting detail. Brandon's motorcycle broke down when he left for Oklahoma, so he loaded it into the back of his pickup truck to fix it when he arrived in Oklahoma. Cindy mentioned that her son did not like conflict situations and she believed that his ex-wife, Amber, was the root of all his problems. Amber's infidelity ruined their relationship from the start, and even after having a son, she continued her unfaithful lifestyle. Whenever Brandon expressed disagreement, Amber would become aggressive and start fights. This eventually led to a divorce, resulting in Brandon gaining full custody of their son, which greatly angered Amber. In response, Amber had abandoned her son for more than a year, not caring about Brandon's life. So when she suddenly reappeared and asked for a second chance, Brandon and his family were shocked and surprised. To better understand the case, the police turned their attention to Amber, knowing about her relationship with Justin. Amber initially claimed that Brandon had left on his motorcycle after an argument, but Brandon's family disputed that the motorcycle had broken down. The question is, if the motorcycle was not seriously broken, why would Brandon take the motorcycle to Oklahoma instead of fixing it at home? As for Amber, she never mentioned that Brandon was fixing the motorcycle. She also claimed that she went to see a doctor after Brandon left to deal with Justin. However, the police found no evidence that she had visited any medical facility in the city that day. All of this meant that Amber had no alibi. Police made a major discovery when they discovered that Amber had asked a friend to babysit her son on the day Brandon died. The friend arrived at the house around 3 p.m., at which point Amber and Brandon left together in Brandon's pickup truck, with his motorcycle in the back. Amber had deliberately left her phone at home and did not return home for 8 hours. However, when she returned, neither Brandon nor his motorcycle were in the truck. After accessing Amber's phone, police found a text message that had been received just before she and Brandon left the house. The message, sent by Justin, read, "Ink is ready." Police believe this implied that everything was ready to deal with Brandon. Police interviewed Amber's close friends, who revealed that she never wanted to reunite with her ex-husband and constantly spoke ill of him. Amber resented Brandon for gaining custody of their son and saw him as a strict, rigid person. However, a forensic handwriting analysis confirmed that Amber had written a note, found in Justin's safe, detailing the materials needed to dispose of a body. When police accessed the local store's surveillance cameras, they learned that the crime had been planned and prepared in advance. The footage, taken the day before Brandon's death, showed Justin purchasing buckets and other items from a list written by Amber. While awaiting trial, Justin maintained that he acted alone and in self-defense. He was trying to protect Amber, who was still at large. Justin explained that the items Amber listed were for home repairs, not for disposing of a body. He also clarified that he used 2 different types of guns. Justin claimed to have a shotgun in one hand and a pistol in the other, a claim that police found highly suspicious. A trial that was expected to last several weeks ended quickly as the jury deliberated for about an hour and a half before returning its verdict. The jury recommended a sentence of life in prison without parole. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Austin expressed satisfaction with the outcome, stating that the verdict was appropriate and brought justice to the family of the victim, Brandon Duran. Cindy Ware, Brandon Duran's mother, was pleased with the jury's decision after nearly 2 years of waiting. In October 2014, Justin Hammer was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 2 months later, Amber was arrested and charged with first-degree murder of her husband Brandon, desecration of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a crime. Amber has pleaded not guilty and hopes to be released on bail. Amber sat in a courtroom, handcuffed and wearing a prison jumpsuit, as she expressed her desire to be home with her son. In an effort to stay with her son until trial, Amber asked the court for bail. However, District Judge Jeff Virgin, who traveled from Norman to preside over the jury trial, agreed to the prosecution's request to deny Amber bail. The trial began in the spring of 2017, more than 2 years after the crime. Amber Andrews pleaded not guilty, her attorney arguing that she was not present at the scene of the crime. However, prosecutors Christy Miller and Jennifer Austin argued that Amber had the sole motive to kill Brandon Duran. Prosecutor Christy said Amber masterminded the crime by luring Brandon to her lover's house, where he was shot 3 times with a pistol by Justin. Amber then allegedly fired the final shot from a shotgun. Christie stressed to the jury that all of the witness testimony and evidence presented at trial implicated Amber directly in the crime. Christie said the only person who wanted him gone was her. The only person with a motive was Amber Andrews. The only person with a reason for him to go away was her. Amber needed Brandon not only dead but gone without a trace. She had a clear motive, and her boyfriend, Justin, had a location where they could commit the crime. They believed they had come up with the perfect plan. According to Christie, the motive was for Amber to get rid of Brandon, allowing her to regain custody of their young son. Amber was away for 8 hours the day Brandon died, and there was no concrete evidence to support her alibi. Prosecutor Christie claimed that Amber helped Justin dispose of the body and clean up the house. She did not want to give her son to a man she hated, and since she could not win custody through the courts, she decided to get rid of Brandon. Defense attorney Jay Mendros argued that the prosecutor's office had failed to provide any evidence linking Amber to the crime. He emphasized this point to the jury, saying that the lack of evidence had led the prosecution to unfairly attack her character. He asserted that Amber was not a cold-blooded killer and did not plan the murder. According to attorney Jay Mendros, Justin committed the crime out of fear of losing Amber, which was further complicated by the fact that Brandon traveled to Oklahoma to reunite with Amber, while Justin, who had been dating Amber for a year, was threatened by the possibility of losing her to Brandon. The defense argued that Justin had a clear motive to kill Brandon because he was involved in a complicated love triangle. The attorney claimed that the prosecution had misinterpreted the testimony and actions of those involved. The defense asserted that a person cannot be convicted on the basis of speculation and suspicion. In this case, the only concrete evidence was Justin Hammer's confession, in which he accepted full responsibility and claimed he acted alone. The jury returned a guilty verdict after hearing more than 4 hours of closing arguments in the Garvin County Courthouse. They recommended a life sentence for Amber Andrews, 35. Sentencing was set for June 12, 2017. On the day of the trial, Amber Andrews appeared in a cheerful mood. Brandon's mother, Cindy Ware, tearfully took the stand to express her thoughts on how her son's death had affected her and her grandson. Brandon's mother, Cindy, addressed Amber directly, saying that her son's death had destroyed all her dreams. She emphasized that Brandon only wanted to be with his family, and that Amber's actions had taken that away from him. Cindy also mentioned that Brandon would never have the chance to teach her son how to snowboard, something he had looked forward to doing. She stared at Amber, shaking her head up and down, and said it was the work of the devil. The judge sentenced Amber Andrews to life in prison without the possibility of parole for her role in the first-degree murder of Brandon Duran. She also received additional prison terms, 7 years for disrespecting Brandon's remains and 10 years for conspiracy to commit a felony. Amber Andrews is currently serving her sentence at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in Oklahoma, while her co-defendant, Justin Hammer, is serving his sentence at the Oklahoma State Prison. Brandon's son, Brando, was placed in the care of the Oklahoma Department of Human Services in August 2012 and is living with a foster family. In January 2013, after Brandon's family fought the court system, Brando was allowed to return to San Diego to live with his grandmother. Finally, after 5 years of fighting, Brando's grandmother, Cindy, won full custody of her son. It wasn't until after the trial that Cindy and her family felt it was time to tell Brando the truth about the court's decision and what had happened to his mother, Amber Andrews. The case of Matthew Patrick Matt Podolak. Matthew Patrick Matt Podolak, born June 10, 1975, in Ohio, USA, to Patricia Romano and Leonard Podak. In high school, Matthew was a member of the hockey team. After graduating, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy and later worked at Phoenix Industrial Finishing, a company owned by his uncle. Although this provided opportunities for advancement, but Matthew encountered difficulty to connect with his co-workers, who may have felt jealous of his privileged position. His sister, Chrissy Duca, attributed the tension was partly due to rumors of a possible promotion, which his colleagues believed he did not deserve. Outside of work, Matthew was an outdoors enthusiast who enjoyed activities such as boating, camping, and hunting. He also played softball and hockey during his free time. In 2003, Matthew met Holly McFeature, and they began dating shortly after, eventually they moving in together in Cleveland. The relationship marked a new chapter in Matthew's life. Friends said that he was eager to settle down and start a family. Matthew and Holly had 2 children together, Samantha and Josh, and also raised Holly's child from a previous relationship as part of their family. Matthew's mother, Patricia, said he loved Holly very much, and his feelings for her were sincere. Matthew's life underwent a drastic change when he transformed from a bachelor to a father of 3 in a short period. Initially, his relationship with Holly was filled with love and mutual understanding. However, by 2005, their romance had turned sour, becoming increasingly argumentative and strained. On multiple occasions, Matthew would leave home after a fight with Holly and spend the night with a friend. Friends, who had grown concerned about the relationship, advised Matthew to end things with Holly, citing her selfish behavior as a major red flag. Despite their warnings, Matthew refused to listen and continually returned to Holly. Furthermore, Matthew had taken out a life insurance policy that named Holly as the beneficiary. Despite the advice of friends to remove her from the policy, Matthew did not make any changes. During this time, Matthew's behavior was erratic, which ranged from extreme happiness to intense anger, upset, and fear. According to Matthew's best friend, Russell, he had become depressed during this time. However, he seemed overly optimistic about his future, particularly when it came to raising his 3 children, a prospect that filled him with both hope for the future. Russell advised Matthew to take precautions and remove the guns from their home due to the volatile situation they were in. After the hockey season ended in 2006, he started online gambling, which resulted in him losing a lot of money. His family and friends noticed that he was struggling with depression and advised him to see a doctor. He followed their advice and was prescribed antidepressants. By the spring of 2006, Matthew's health started to deteriorate. His condition worsened by Memorial Day weekend, causing Russell to become extremely concerned about Matthew's physical well-being. Around that time, Russell had asked him for help transferring a motor from one boat to another. However, he was no longer the strong person he once was, experiencing severe back pain and complaining of excessive sweating and a lack of strength. Russell urged Matthew to see a doctor and recommended Dr. Thomas Mandat. He scheduled an appointment with Dr. Mandat for July 26, 2006. On the day of the appointment, he called Russell to ask for directions to the doctor's office. During their conversation, Russell could hear Holly arguing with Matthew in the background. Matthew visited the doctor, complaining of back pain. After examining him, Dr. Mandat diagnosed him with kidney stones and prescribed medication to help pass the stones and alleviate the associated pain. In a phone call to his father on the afternoon of July 30th, Matthew shared his excitement about buying a new fishing rod for his daughter. He was looking forward to taking her fishing, hoping they could go together soon, along with his father. Matthew's anticipation for their upcoming family outing were evident in the conversation with his father. On the evening of the same day, Matthew attended a party with Russell. He found Matthew's health condition alarming. Matthew had gained significant weight, was sweating excessively, and struggled to walk. Matthew also complained of severe back pain. Later that evening, Matthew's condition worsened, and Holly became concerned. She called 911 and then contacted Matthew's father, informing him that something was wrong with his son. Matthew's father had a brief phone conversation with him and found he to be confused and very distressed. Matthew was rushed to the emergency room at Parma General Hospital, where doctors suspected he was experiencing organ failure. Tests revealed that Matthew's kidneys had failed, and he was suffering from metabolic acidosis, a condition where the blood becomes highly acidic. Dr. Mandat, an emergency room doctor, suspected that Matthew had ingested a toxic substance, such as methanol or antifreeze. When questioned, Holly denied the possibility that Matthew had swallowed antifreeze or medical alcohol, asserting that he had not consumed anything that could have caused harm. On July 31, 2006, Matthew passed away at the hospital due to kidney failure. According to Dr. Mandad's testimony, Matthew's death was not caused by respiratory problems, as metabolic acidosis typically is. Instead, Dr. Mandad explained that ethylene glycol can also cause this condition. After Matthew's death, his family and friends were overcome with grief, but Holly seemed unaffected. In the days that followed, her friend Rebecca Vega tried to offer support and accompanied her to the funeral home. However, Vega noticed that Holly did not feel sad at all. At the wake, Matthew's father had to ask Holly to join the family in the main room to receive visitors, and even then, she appeared to be unfeeling and indifferent. Russell recalled that Holly acted like it was a normal gathering, showing no signs of grief. The day after Matthew's death was particularly telling. Holly used Matthew's bank card to withdraw money from an ATM and wrote checks in his name, draining his bank account. When Matthew's mother reported Holly's suspicious behavior to the police, Holly was arrested and charged with 2 counts of forgery. She later agreed to restitution and was placed on probation for 1 year. Holly was the beneficiary of Matthew's life insurance policy, although the policy was relatively small, and she received only $10,000 after his death. 2 weeks later, her friend Rebecca visited Holly and noticed various cleaning supplies, including what appeared to be solvents, left out in the open. Since there were small children living in the house, Rebecca found this absurd and asked Holly about it. She calmly explained that one of the items was antifreeze, which Matthew used to winterize his boat. However, Russell disagreed with this and stated that Matthew's boat had not been operational since its engine broke down in 2004 or 2005. Holly's demeanor after Matthew's death raised concerns with others. For example, she had an intimate relationship with Michael Jaima, a Cleveland police officer, who would often visit her home for coffee. Michael had known Holly since 2002. One day, Michael called Holly to ask if he should come to her house at this time. She replied that there was no need to worry about it anymore, because Matthew died last week, without showing any emotion. She attributed Matthew's death to kidney issues and pain from playing hockey, but her tone came across as careless and heartless. Following Matthew's death, his belongings were removed from the house. Holly asked a friend to erase some content from Matthew's computer and then cut up his clothes to make a quilt. 6 weeks after Matthew's passing, Holly began dating Charles Lipham, a Cleveland police officer. Initially, she told Charles that Matthew had died from kidney failure. However, after the autopsy report was released in January 2007, she changed her story. The autopsy revealed that Matthew had an unusually large amount of ethylene glycol in his system, the key ingredient in antifreeze. Later, Holly told Charles that Matthew might have intentionally taken something to end his life. The autopsy report confirmed that Matthew died from chronic ethylene glycol intoxication, but the coroner was unable to determine how or why he ingested the substance. It's worth noting that Holly told Charles that she didn't know what antifreeze was. Holly also provided conflicting explanations for Matthew's death, telling friend Sean Walsh that Matthew had died in an industrial accident. She also said that one of his co-workers might have poisoned him out of envy due to his connection to the boss. However, Matthew's family suspects that the truth behind his death may have been caused by someone close to him. This skepticism is partly due to Holly's indifferent attitude at the funeral, which contrasted with claims from Holly's sister that she had been crying in the car beforehand. During the investigation, detectives discovered 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage of the house Holly had relocated from, which they took into evidence in 2007. The findings were recorded in a police report. Later in 2007, after parting ways with Charles, Holly met Jameson Kennedy while working at a bar. As they started dating, Holly chose not to share any details about Matthew's death with Jameson. However, Jameson has a troubled past, with multiple convictions and struggles with addiction. One evening in September 2008, Holly and Jameson were together, consuming alcohol, and take action intimate. According to Jameson, Holly became emotional. She began crying and confided in him about Matthew's death. She expressed her desire to leave Cleveland and put the past behind her. Holly confessed to putting something in Matthew's drinks that made him ill and ultimately led to his death. However, Jameson was unsure if she was telling the truth. Seeking advice, Jameson met with his friend Santiago Feliciano, a lawyer, and shared Holly's confession with him. Santiago recommended that Jameson report this information to the authorities if he believed it to be true. Jameson then called Holly to discuss her earlier confession, unaware that their conversation was being recorded. He hoped she will turn herself in and admit that she is the one who caused Matthew's death. Instead, Holly vehemently denied ever harming Matthew, claiming Jameson was misinterpreting her. The conversation between Holly and Jameson caused a rift in their relationship. Jameson began to suspect that Holly was cheating on him. On November 8, 2008, Jameson went to her house to confront her. Feeling threatened, Holly called the police. When the officers arrived, Jameson attacked them and was subsequently arrested and charged with assault. Jameson was sentenced to 10 years in prison after being found guilty of assaulting officers. Following his arrest, he informed the police about a confession he'd have heard from Holly, reportedly linking her to the death of Matthew. This added to the evidence of Holly's involvement in Matthew's death. The police initially investigated the death in 2007 after the autopsy report was released, but the case stalled for many years because they initially did not consider it an intentional act. To re-examine the case, it is essential to look at the autopsy report. Dr. Galita, an experienced forensic pathologist and medical examiner, conducted the autopsy. Then, Dr. Galita and County Coroner Dr. Elizabeth Balch released their autopsy report in January 2007. The report determined Matthew's death was caused by chronic ethylene glycol poisoning, although the circumstances surrounding it were unclear. When Matthew ingested ethylene glycol, it entered his bloodstream and was quickly broken down by his liver using an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase. This process converted the ethylene glycol into oxalate, which then combined with calcium to form sharp calcium oxalate crystals. A large number of these crystals accumulated in Pax's kidneys, causing a blockage that disrupted their function. According to Dr. Galita, the severe pain Matthew experienced in his side starting on May 20, 2006, was likely caused by the crystals in his kidneys. When Dr. Galita examined Matthew's kidneys, he found two significant things. In addition to kidney damage, there are signs that the kidneys are beginning to heal. Further examination revealed the emergence of the crystals in Matthew's heart and brain, as well as severe acute myocarditis. Myocarditis is an acute inflammation of the heart muscle. The doctor stated that Matthew's myocarditis could not have been caused by an ingestion of ethylene glycol. Instead, the inflammation would have taken at least 3 weeks to develop. He also ruled out a heart attack as the cause of death. In conclusion, Dr. Galita determined that Matthew's death was the result of long-term ethylene glycol poisoning. He believed a series of but acute toxicity episodes, occurring over at least a 3-month period, ultimately led to his death. Matthew often drank iced tea at work, particularly raspberry flavor. He usually brought it in a thermos or the container. A Matthew's friend, Michael Mao, testified that Holly frequently brought Matthew lunch at work. His meal often came with a half or whole gallon container of iced tea. The police found 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage of Holly's former home in August 2007. The bottles, one a Peak brand and the other a Saturn brand, were discovered after she had moved out. 3 years after Matthew's autopsy results were released, a report amendment was made to the report in 2010. The revised report, signed by County Coroner Dr. Frank Miller, confirmed that Matthew died from poisoning by ethylene glycol, a toxin found in antifreeze, in long term, and deemed the death a homicide. 6 years after Matthew's death, the authorities decided it was time to arrest Holly. She was formally charged in July of that year with the serious offense of depriving Matthew of his life. Holly's charges came as no surprise to Matthew's family. According to his older brother, Mark, they suspected Holly's involvement in his younger brother's death all along. Mark stated that Holly's behavior around the time of the death raised suspicions, saying she just wasn't acting like somebody who was losing a loved one. Authorities suspected that Holly had been secretly poisoning Matthew by adding antifreeze to his cold raspberry tea for several weeks or even months. In 2013, she went to court, pleading not guilty to the charges. However, there was no direct evidence, only indirect indications of her guilt. To prove their case, the prosecution called 15 witnesses to testify. These witnesses included Matthew's family and friends, Dr. Galita, who conducted the autopsy, Dr. Thomas Mandat, who was Matthew's doctor, and several police officers who investigated the case. Witnesses focused on several key points, including Holly's suspicious actions, a phone call Matthew made before visiting the doctor, and the fact that Matthew had not owned a functioning boat since 2004, which meant he had no use for antifreeze. Holly's defense team countered by stating that Matthew's family and friends had prejudged her as guilty and then pressured law enforcement to bring charges against her following Matthew's death. The prosecution's strongest testimony came from Dr. Galita, the medical examiner in charge of performing the autopsy. Dr. Galita provided a detailed explanation for his conclusion that Matthew was the victim of chronic poisoning over a period of 3 months. He arrived at this conclusion because on the emergence of crystals in Matthew's kidneys and myocarditis, a type of inflammation of the heart muscle that can be caused by exposure to ethylene glycol. After ruling out causes other of myocarditis, such as infection, Dr. Galita emphasized that Matthew's condition could not have been the result of a single, short-term exposure to ethylene glycol. Dr. Galita also clarified why the initial autopsy report, completed in 2007, did not indicate that Matthew's death was intentional. He explained that, at the time, the coroner's office did not have enough information to make this determination, which led to the manner of death being listed as undetermined. However, after further investigation, the report was revised. The testimony of other witnesses supported Dr. Galita's findings. Matthew's friends reported that his health began to decline in the spring of 2006, which was confirmed by his diagnosis of kidney stones in July 2006. The friends also described a volatile relationship between Matthew and Holly, stating that Matthew seemed fearful and had removed his firearms from the home at the advice of a friend. Holly's lawyers claimed that their client was not involved in Matthew's death, suggesting instead that Matthew's depression led him to end his life. According to the defense, Matthew was struggling with losses from online gambling, work-related issues, and difficulties communicating with his child, ultimately leading him to deliberately ingest a lethal dose of antifreeze. The defense argued that Matthew died from a single dose of antifreeze rather than from prolonged exposure over several weeks or months. In support of this theory, they brought Dr. Robert Lux to testify in court, the coroner from El Paso County, Colorado. Dr. Lux testified that Matthew's death was a result of acute poisoning due to a single ingestion of ethylene glycol, indicating a possible suicidal intent. He disputed Dr. Galita's diagnosis of myocarditis and instead believed Matthew had suffered a heart attack. Furthermore, Dr. Lux explained that myocarditis can occur independently of ethylene glycol poisoning and that flank pain is not typically a symptom of ethylene glycol poisoning. He said that there was no connection between kidney stones and ethylene glycol poisoning, a relevant detail in the case. Several key witnesses testified during the trial. One notable witness was Jameson Kennedy, a felon who had been serving a 10-year sentence for assaulting police officers. Jameson claimed that Holly had confessed to him that she had mixed something into Matthew's drinks. However, Holly denied ever making such a statement. Holly argued that Jameson's testimony was motivated by a desire for leniency in his own case or revenge against her. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on all counts. On August 28, 2013, the court sentenced Holly McFeature to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The case of Michelle Davis. Michelle Davis was born on December 15, 1966. She lived in Des Moines. In 2008, Michelle, 41-year-old, lived in Des Moines and had 3 children. Those who knew Michelle described her as friendly, adventurous, and passionate about motorcycles. As a secretary at a trucking company, she earned respect and authority at work. Her divorce was almost finalized, marking a big change in her life. Then, Michelle had moved into her own apartment and obtained a restraining order against her husband, Randy Davis. The months leading up to their divorce were strained for the family. On Thursday, September 11, 2008, Michelle was working at her job. Her colleagues noticed that after divorce to her husband, she seemed unusually carefree, as if a long-standing burden had been lifted off her shoulders. She was in high spirits and left the office around 4:30 p.m. after completing her tasks. Soon after, the 911 dispatch center receiving calls from eyewitnesses, reporting a car accident on Interstate 235. The Mercury Sable car was flipped over, with an unconscious woman, still wearing a seatbelt, in the driver's seat. Unfortunately, paramedics were unable to save her, and the woman was identified as Michelle Davis. Initially, the police believed that Michelle had lost control of the vehicle, resulting in the accident. However, by the next day, this theory was ruled out. Forensic examination revealed that Michelle's death was caused by a gunshot wound to the head, not by injuries sustained during the rollover accident. The extracted bullet was sent for further examination, in the hopes of identifying the perpetrator. The investigators assigned to this case were faced with an unusual and challenging situation. As they awaited the results of the ballistic examination, local authorities took precautions to ensure public safety. There was concern that Michelle might have been a random victim, raises the possibility that the perpetrator may target others. Plus, a large number of cars travel on this interstate, putting numerous drivers at risk of being targeted by the shooter. Given the urgency of the situation, the police increased their patrols in the city. Once it was confirmed that Michelle's death was not an accident, detectives went to the crime scene to collect evidence. Unfortunately, they didn't find any leads, including the cartridge case or other evidence. The initial assumption that Michelle's death was a car accident led to traffic services clearing the site, which likely destroyed any potential evidence. However, detectives didn't give up. They decided to review traffic camera recordings, which have helped solve numerous cases in the past. By analyzing the available footage, the investigators looked for the camera closest to the crime scene. After reviewing the footage for half an hour, found the relevant clip. The video showed Michelle's car overturning, but the quality was poor due to choppy and intermittent images, making it difficult to determine what happened. Despite managing to obtain a few relevant images, but the investigators were unable to find conclusive evidence of the incident leading to the rollover. The investigators faced a great difficulty, as they were sure that they held an important clue that would help solve the case, but in the end it turned out to be a false clue. The police were left with no choice but to continue scrutinizing the remaining camera footage and search for eyewitnesses other. While a team of investigators carefully examined footage from traffic cameras, the lead investigator on Michelle Davis's case paid a visit to her family to share some news. It had been initially assumed that Michelle's death was an accident, however, but in reality that is not the case. The revelation that Michelle was, in fact, a victim of a crime left her family stunned. This tragic news was particularly devastating for Michelle's father, Lee Costner. His wife, Michelle's mother Patty, had passed away before their daughter. Lee Costner had already experienced the loss of a child once before. His first daughter, Cheryl Sue Costner, died in 1965 at just 1 year old. Now, 43 years later, he had to face the unbearable pain of losing another child. Having to outlive one's children is arguably the most unimaginable hardship for a parent. Michelle's family informed investigators that her life had undergone significant changes recently. They suspected that the one person who could potentially harm Michelle was her husband, Randy Davis, due to their pending divorce and a restraining order filed against him. While investigating Michelle's background, another detective spoke with her colleagues at work and discovered that she had developed a close relationship with a coworker named Matt Jorgensen. According to Michelle's friend, the feelings between them were mutual. However, since Michelle was in the process of divorcing Randy, they decided to keep their relationship private, known only to a few colleagues and close friends. As a result, the police now had two potential suspects, Randy Davis and Matt Jorgensen. When investigators attempted to contact Randy, they were unsuccessful, as all calls went straight to voicemail. In contrast, they were able to speak with Matt, who openly discussed his relationship with Michelle and provided an account of his activities on the day of her death. Matt stated that they never had arguments or fights. He was visibly shaken by Michelle's death and cooperated fully with the investigators. After verifying his alibi, the police eliminated him as a suspect. The ballistic examination results revealed that the crime was committed with a .22 caliber rifle at close range. Given that the incident occurred on the interstate, police believe the shooter was most likely driving another vehicle, next to Michelle's, at the same time. A new lead emerged when the police received a call from Michelle's insurance company, stating that her brother Todd was filing a claim for the life insurance payout. This raised suspicions, as insurance-related murders are not uncommon. The detective decided to pay Todd a visit to ask some questions. During the interrogation, Todd realized he was being treated as a suspect, so he explained his whereabouts on the day of Michelle's death. Todd revealed that their family was struggling financially and couldn't afford a proper funeral for Michelle, prompting him to file the insurance claim to cover the expenses. Further investigation into Todd's alibi confirmed that he was indeed in a different part of the city at the time of Michelle's death, ruling him out as the shooter. Todd provided the police with information that pointed to another suspect, Michelle's stepson, Josh. At the time of the incident, Josh was an adult who had recently returned from serving in the Marines. As someone familiar with handling weapons, Josh became a person of interest in the investigation. The police began to explore motives that could have driven Josh to commit this crime. In another development, a witness came forward with a crucial tip. A woman who was driving on Interstate 235 around the same time as Michelle's accident reported seeing a red pickup truck. Likely a Ford F-150, with a driver behaving erratically. The driver, described as in white, man wearing a baseball cap, was swerving from lane to lane. It feels like he's chasing someone. Although the description was limited, the investigators deemed this new information significant and proceeded to investigate further. The investigation into Michelle's death led detectives to review footage from traffic cameras, focusing on the presence of a red pickup truck. A woman had tipped off the police about a suspicious red truck, and indeed, the footage showed this vehicle following Michelle from her workplace. Although the footage quality was poor, preventing identification of the driver and license plates, further review of recordings from other cameras confirmed the truck was tailing Michelle along her route. This strongly suggested that the killer was likely targeting Michelle specifically. Detectives soon discovered that Michelle's husband, Randy Davis, was the owner of a red pickup truck. They immediately visited his residence but found him not at home. However, His son Josh, a Marine with professional knowledge of firearms, was at home. Josh stated Randy had spent the day of Michelle's death shopping with his sister, returned home, and spent the evening watching TV. He also revealed that Michelle's divorce from Randy had been complex, particularly due to her demand for half the value of their house. Additionally, Josh mentioned that his father had come home around 5:30 p.m. that evening. Josh's account of incident did not seem believable, and the conversation with Josh revealed that he had a possible motive for the crime. When his father and Michelle divorce, she will receive a portion of the estate, which makes him unhappy. However, these were just suspicions, and without concrete evidence, there was not enough to warrant an arrest or charges. As Michelle's family made funeral arrangements, the police continued searching for leads. They investigated shops and gas stations along the route between Michelle's workplace and where she died, to gather additional camera surveillance footage. Near Michelle's workplace, a store provided another crucial piece of footage. The surveillance camera inside the store also captured part of the parking lot. On September 11, 2008, the day of Michelle's death, a red pickup truck parked at the store's entrance around 4 p.m. The police identified the truck as Randy's vehicle, but since Josh also used it, they needed to determine who was driving it that day. The footage showed the driver exit the truck, enter the store, and then disappear from view temporarily, then reappearing to make a purchase and leave. The poor video quality made it impossible to distinguish whether the driver was Randy or Josh. To clarify the events, here's what happened. Michelle left work at 4:30 p.m., but police had looked at the timeline before then. At 4 p.m., a series of incidents occurred near the store where Michelle worked. The police reviewed the footage and found a pickup truck repeatedly visiting the store in the 30 minutes that followed. In each of these visits, the driver did not get out of the truck but instead turned around and drove away. The last time the truck was seen near the store was when Michelle left work. Despite the efforts of the police to identify the driver, they were unsuccessful. The police then decided to try to contact Randy again. This time, they were successful, and Randy came to the police station. Before interviewing him, the police made it clear that Randy was not under arrest and explained his rights. During the interview, the police asked Randy about his whereabouts on September 11th. Randy mentioned that he and Michelle were in the process of getting a divorce after 17 years of marriage. He also said that he worked as a carpenter and went to work that day. When asked what time he got home from work, Randy hesitated, then saying he arrived home at 3:45 p.m. However, this contradicted the surveillance footage and the testimony of Josh. According to Josh, his father got home around 5:30 p.m., which is about 2 hours later than the time Randy provided. Randy further stated that he did not leave his house after 3:45 p.m. and claimed he was alone until Josh arrived, and they cooked dinner together. However, this information also contradicts Josh's statement, who said that he was already home when his father arrived. Randy and Josh's defenses contradict each other, and after questioning Randy, investigators discovered that one of them was lying. To see Randy's reaction, they revealed to him that Michelle had actually died from a gunshot wound, not from injuries sustained in a car accident. This information had been kept confidential, known only to Michelle's family. However, Randy's reaction was very suspicious. He barely reacted, feigning surprise and looking away. When questioned about his last talk with Michelle, Randy requested a lawyer, effectively ending the conversation. Although the investigation lacked crucial evidence, including the murder weapon, thus the police released Randy. For days after Michelle's death, her family and friends gathered for her funeral on September 15th. 2008, Randy attended the ceremony, tried to appear sad and even burst into tears. Investigators worked hard to quickly find the killer. Unexpected help arrived when Josh, accompanied by his lawyer, walked into the police station and expressed his desire to make a statement. According to Josh, On the day of the incident, he had returned home from his sister's house to find his father, Randy, in the driveway with their car. As Josh entered the house, he saw his father holding a gun, and Randy warned him away, saying it would be better if he didn't come in right then. Josh claimed to have immediately understood what his father was planning and tried to stop him, begging Randy not to do something he would later regret. Regardless of Josh's plea, Randy drove away in the car and returned later, parking in the garage. It was then that Randy confessed to Josh that he had shot Michelle. As it turned out, Randy had been struggling to cope with Michelle's decision to file for divorce and her plans to sue him for part of their property. On September 11, 2008, Randy had waited for Michelle to leave work, driving past her workplace several times to avoid missing her. This explained why he appeared on the store's CCTV footage multiple times. Once Michelle left work, Randy followed her and eventually found the right moment to act. He rolled down the passenger side window and fired. The police arrested Randy based on Josh's testimony. Before the trial, Randy accepted a plea deal, admitting to deprivation of life Michelle's in exchange for a reduced sentence. As a result, 53 years old Randy Davis was sentenced to 50 years in prison in 2010. The case of Elizabeth Nicole Forshee Cyperta. Elizabeth was born on May 13, 1978, in Truckee, California. She lived with her parents and younger brother. When Elizabeth was 13, the Cyperta family moved across the street. Michael and Sally Cyperta had 2 young children and were struggling to balance work and family. Michael wanted Sally to go back to work, so they decided to find a babysitter. Michael suggested hiring Elizabeth, then 14, to babysit their children. Sally agreed, and Elizabeth began babysitting for the neighbor's family. Elizabeth grew attached to Michael and Sally's children as she spent more time with them. The children also enjoyed being around her. When Elizabeth was 15, her father passed away, a traumatic event that deeply affected her. According to her mother, Donna Forshee, Elizabeth became more sensitive and vulnerable after this event. She began to admire and grow closer to Michael Cyperta, seeing him as an ideal father figure. Elizabeth believes that Michael loves his children unconditionally and supports their interests. Elizabeth used to babysit Michael and Sally's children during the day. However, she started staying at their house until late at night. This continued for about 2 years. One day, Michael decided to move to Iowa with his family to be closer to his relatives. He invited Elizabeth to come along as a babysitter. Elizabeth's mother, Donna, strongly objected and tried to stop her daughter, even calling Child Protective Services to intervene. However, Donna's efforts were in vain. Elizabeth was too attached to Michael, Sally, and their 2 children. Although she was still in high school, she was determined to stick with her decision and moved to Winfield, Iowa with Cyperta's family. After Elizabeth moved away, her mother Donna and her best friend Shannon Gerber maintained regular contact with her, either by phone or by weekly letters. Elizabeth graduated from high school in Iowa in May 1997. Donna attended her graduation and gave her daughter an emerald and diamond ring, which Elizabeth treasured. During this time, Michael divorced his wife, Sally, and began a relationship with Elizabeth. After the divorce, Sally left the children with Michael and Elizabeth and moved away. Although Sally maintained contact with her children, she cut off all contact with Michael and stopped speaking to Elizabeth. Michael, then in her 40s, immediately demonstrated his controlling nature. He limited what Elizabeth could and could not do, as well as who she could talk to. He attempted to control every aspect of Elizabeth's life. From the beginning, their relationship seemed dysfunctional. As a result, Elizabeth's mother and best friend Shannon found it increasingly difficult to contact her. Michael did not like Elizabeth talking to them and would often get angry if she did. As a result, Elizabeth would only dare to call them when Michael was not home. During this time, Elizabeth became friends with Harper Tracy through church. Harper noticed that Elizabeth had suffered 5 or 6 injuries during their friendship, including finger marks on her neck and bruises on her stomach. Harper's daughter, Sadie, who was about 7 years old, knew Michael's children through church and occasionally played at their home. Sadie remembers one time when she visited, she witnessed Michael pushing Elizabeth down the stairs and kneeling on her. Harper also remembers Elizabeth arriving at church in a state of panic and fear after fleeing a violent argument with Michael. Elizabeth confided that she was afraid of Michael and could not take any more abuse. Harper discovered multiple bruises on Elizabeth's stomach and marks on her arms. Elizabeth stayed in Harper's trailer for a month. During that time, Michael appeared near the trailer almost every day and acted threateningly. He would park his truck about 10 feet away from the trailer and tease Elizabeth. Specifically, he threatened her by saying that Elizabeth would be isolated and no one would find her if she did not listen to him. He left hazmat notices and a torn cat collar outside, along with a message warning that she would disappear like the cat if she did not return. He also threatened to harm the family's animals and began blackmailing her with videotapes and photos he had. According to Harper, he threatened to kill Elizabeth and dispose of her body 6 times. Harper called the police to stop him, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. There were clearly many warning signs about Michael. Everyone saw him as someone to stay away from. However, Elizabeth was young and naive, so she still hoped that Michael would change. Unfortunately, at the age of 40, people rarely change their behavior and attitude towards others. After a long time of pressure from Michael, eventually, Elizabeth decided to leave Harper's trail to live with Michael. They married in January 1998 in Mount Pleasant. Despite her attempts to prevent the marriage, Harper attended their wedding. Afterwards, Michael took the initiative to cut off all contact between Harper and Elizabeth. At Michael's request, Elizabeth finally told Harper not to come to their house anymore. Harper was not the only one concerned about Elizabeth and Michael's marriage. Elizabeth's mother, Donna, also disapproved of the relationship and refused to come to Iowa for her daughter's wedding. However, in June 2000, Elizabeth went to California to attend her younger brother's high school graduation. Although Michael stayed in Iowa, he continued to keep an eye on Elizabeth. During the 3 days Elizabeth stayed with her mother, Michael called her repeatedly. He was concerned that Donna was trying to influence Elizabeth not to return to Iowa. After each call, Elizabeth felt sad and confused. She considered leaving her husband but was not sure. To reassure Michael, Elizabeth moved out of her mother's house and moved in with Shannon Gerber, her childhood friend. Shannon had kept in touch with Elizabeth since Elizabeth moved to Iowa. They tried to talk every month, often calling when Michael was not home. However, Elizabeth's move to live with her friend did not lessen Michael's anger. Instead, he began harassing Shannon by calling her repeatedly. Most of the calls were threatening. Shannon recalled Michael threatening Elizabeth. He screamed at her and said he would kill her if she did not come home. Michael also threatened to kill Elizabeth's mother, younger brother, Shannon, and her young son. He called her constantly, day and night, sometimes dozens of times an hour. Finally, Shannon's husband couldn't take it anymore and turned off the phone. This clearly made Michael even angrier. Shannon begged Elizabeth not to return to Iowa. "I didn't want her to go because I was afraid I would never see her again," Shannon confided. She deliberately took a detour to the airport, hoping Elizabeth would miss her flight. However, the flight was delayed and Elizabeth was still able to catch it. After returning to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, Elizabeth began working at Experian. There, she met Sarah Thomas, a coworker who quickly became her best friend. Because Sarah lived near the Sipura family home, she often took Elizabeth home after work. During these trips, they talked a lot and Elizabeth gradually trusted Sarah. She shared with Sarah about her difficult relationship with her husband, Michael, and even showed Sarah the bruises on her body that Michael had caused. Elizabeth and Sarah became very close to each other, close enough to cause problems. One day, while Michael was away, his two children peered through the bedroom keyhole and saw Sarah and Elizabeth getting intimate. When Elizabeth discovered that the children had witnessed the scene, she hastily packed up and moved in with Sarah. When Sarah's girlfriend, Terry, went outside to walk the dog, Michael came over and asked her to call Sarah's work phone and ask Elizabeth to return home. He had a bottle of alcohol in his hand, and his children were following him and crying. Michael explained that his wife had left him, she was not answering his calls, and he did not know what to do. When Elizabeth and Sarah entered the apartment, they saw Michael and Terry waiting for them. Frightened, Elizabeth and Sarah left. Michael shouted at Terry to follow him. They got into the car and gave chase. The two couples met face to face in a nearby parking lot. Terry started fighting with Sarah because she felt betrayed. Elizabeth was sitting in the car at the time and was afraid to get out. Cursing, screaming, and threatening, Michael approached Elizabeth and dragged her out through the window of the car. During the struggle, Elizabeth suffered a lacerated rib, and her shirt got torn. Sarah and Elizabeth fled to a nearby gas station, where they reported the assault to the police. The state charged Michael with first-degree burglary and domestic abuse assault. The court approved the no-contact order protecting Elizabeth. Terry packed her things and left, so Elizabeth and Sarah started living together. Michael continued to harass Sarah despite a ban. He would sit across the street, shouting insults or verbally abusing her. Additionally, Sarah received numerous incoming phone calls, but whenever she picked up, the caller would remain silent. She filed a report with the police, who worked with her phone company to set up a trap on her line to track the origin of these calls. Over a 3-week period, from June 26th to July 16th, Sarah's phone records revealed Michael made 162 calls to her apartment. On July 16, 2000, 1 month after her breakup with Michael, Sarah left for work at 10:30 p.m. At the time, Elizabeth was asleep on the couch. Their dog was safely locked in the bathroom to avoid disturbing Elizabeth when Sarah returned home at 4 a.m. However, upon arriving back, Sarah was surprised to find that Elizabeth had vanished. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle, and Elizabeth's personal documents remained intact. The dog was still locked in the bathroom. Sarah decided to go to bed. When she awoke the next morning, Elizabeth was still missing. It became clear that Elizabeth had left without taking her purse, clothes, or other essential belongings, and she did not leave behind any note or explanation. Sarah reported Elizabeth's disappearance to the police 24 hours after first discovering she was gone. Elizabeth was 22 years old when she disappeared. The police launched an investigation, and of course, Michael was their first suspect. On July 16th, the day Elizabeth disappeared, Michael started phoning the apartment around 3 p.m., logging more than a dozen calls through the evening. He last called at 10:56 p.m., that is, he stopped making calls 26 minutes after Sarah left for work and left Elizabeth alone. On July 17th, Michael was supposed to be at work. His friend Jared agreed to watch Michael's children. Jared testified he found Michael was pretty intoxicated when he arrived at his house around 5:30 a.m. Jared said Michael told him Elizabeth had stayed overnight and left around 5 a.m. Michael decided not to go to work that morning. Police called Michael the next day, July 18th, to ask if he had heard from Elizabeth. He said he had not. On July 20th, officers came to his house to let him know Elizabeth was missing. Michael said his taking a sick day from work on July 17th, the day after Elizabeth disappeared, was a coincidence. Michael also stated that due to their breakup, he hadn't been eating and had been getting cramps. Elizabeth seemed to disappear into thin air. She didn't contact her family or friends, her bank account was untouched, and she had not even received her salary for the last month. The investigators knew that Elizabeth could not just leave without documents and money. All the friends she could have stayed with knew nothing about her whereabouts. The police interviewed residents and distributed flyers with an image and description of Elizabeth, but none of these actions gave the desired result. In early September 2000, Larry Headland, an agent with the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigation, interviewed Michael. During the interview, Michael claimed that he and Elizabeth had a harmonious relationship and denied any allegations of abuse between them. When asked about the attack on Elizabeth on June 16th, Michael admitted that it was an unusual action on his part. He explained that he had been drinking and that his emotions had taken over, leading to his inappropriate actions. Initially, Michael denied making the harassing phone calls to Sarah's apartment. However, when presented with evidence from the call records, he admitted responsibility. The agent then pointed out that the calls to Michael's apartment had stopped the night Elizabeth went missing. This caused Michael to become stressed. Michael explained that he just wanted to avoid arrest and did not want to be charged or held responsible for anything. That's why he lied about the phone calls. He objected when Larry suggested that Elizabeth was dead. After this interview, the police obtained a search warrant for Michael's home. In Michael's bedroom, the police found an unlocked safe. Inside or on top of the safe, an officer found a $2,000 gold pendant that Michael had given Elizabeth and a V-shaped diamond and emerald ring that she had received from her mother as a graduation gift. Elizabeth only removed the ring when she was showering or soaking in the tub, otherwise, it was on her finger. In police photos taken after Michael attacked Elizabeth, the ring was still on her hand. Elizabeth had not been back to Michael's house since. So how did the ring end up in Michael's safe? When the police asked for an explanation, Michael said that Elizabeth must have left it behind when she moved out. However, officer pointed out that Elizabeth was still wearing the ring in a photo taken on June 16th, the day of the attack. Michael could not explain why the ring was in his bedroom. There are some suspicious points in Elizabeth's disappearance. Michael abruptly stopped contacting her on the day she disappeared, although the police only notified him 4 days later. This suggests that Michael may be hiding something. However, the police need concrete evidence to charge him. Time has passed so quickly that it is difficult to find clues. One possibility is that Elizabeth voluntarily went into hiding. But her family does not believe this. Although the case has been quiet for many years, her mother, Donna, has not lost hope that her daughter will return. Every year, she travels to Iowa, where Elizabeth used to live, to organize activities to raise awareness about her daughter's disappearance. In 2010, Donna rented a billboard with Elizabeth's picture and offered a $20,000 reward for any information about her daughter. Donna said she was concerned that something might have happened to her daughter, but she was hopeful that she would eventually be found. "Someone definitely knows what happened to my daughter, and I hope that us coming out will jog their memory," she said. 10 years after her daughter's disappearance, Donna has developed her own theories about what happened. In an interview, she said, "I think the person called her and lured her out of the apartment to meet them. Then they argued and something bad happened that night." Despite the best efforts of the police and her family, Elizabeth's fate remains a mystery. Since her disappearance in 2000, investigators have searched 79 different locations but have not found Elizabeth's body. They entered her information into the National Crime Information Center's Missing Persons database. 17 years later, in 2017, the investigation was reopened. By this time, Michael Seiperda had moved to Colorado. Police reviewed all the evidence and interviews. They discovered a key detail that had previously been overlooked. Jared, Michael's friend who was assigned to watch Michael's children on July 17, 2000, told police that when he arrived at Michael's house at 5:30 a.m., he found Michael quite drunk. According to Jared's testimony, Michael said that Elizabeth had stayed the night and left around 5 a.m. However, in previous interviews, Michael had never mentioned Elizabeth sleeping over at his house. More significantly, Elizabeth's jewelry was found in Michael's safe. Authorities decided to arrest Michael 17 years after Elizabeth went missing. Although her body was never found, investigators believe that Elizabeth was dead and that Michael was the culprit. In November 2017, Michael was arrested in Colorado and extradited to Iowa, where he was charged with first-degree murder in the death of his wife Elizabeth. Donna said, "This is the best news we've had in 17 years. We've waited a long time and are so glad that he's finally been arrested." Michael later waived his right to a jury trial. The loss of key physical evidence, especially the victim's body, made it significantly more difficult for prosecutors to prove guilt. Without a body, forensic experts could not determine the cause of death, and the jury could not directly observe the victim's injuries or view crime scene photos. The defense argued that the prosecutor's goal was not to find the truth, but to convict Michael by looking for inconsistencies in witness testimony. Although the trial took place 18 years after the incident, the defense acknowledged during closing arguments that a body was not required to establish a homicide. However, Michael still challenged the state's evidence of Elizabeth's death. The district court concluded that the state had proven her death beyond a reasonable doubt. The court held that any theory that Elizabeth was still alive and could reappear at any time was unrealistic. The state presented evidence that Michael was the last person to speak to Elizabeth at 10:56 p.m. on July 16th, which he himself admitted. The district court noted Jared's testimony that Michael told Elizabeth to stay at his house that night. In addition, there were other suspicious circumstances. Michael unexpectedly left work on July 17th and did not call Elizabeth's apartment again, even though the police did not officially report her missing until July 20th. From this evidence, the state established that Michael's hatred of Elizabeth led to murder. Because Michael was controlling and possessive of Elizabeth, it was highly likely that he intentionally caused her physical harm when she decided to leave him for someone else. The strained relationship between them was clear evidence of Michael's intentional intent to cause harm. The state presented evidence that Michael had repeatedly threatened to kill Elizabeth and dispose of her body so that no one would find it. From these repeated threats, the jury could conclude that Michael had intended to kill Elizabeth. The court reviewed the evidence and made a crucial decision. They discovered that Elizabeth had opened a new bank account just 9 days before her disappearance, but had not withdrawn her last paycheck. They concluded that she was dead. After carefully evaluating all the evidence, the court found that Michael was responsible for Elizabeth's death. On June 25, 2018, Michael Cyperta, 58, was convicted of first-degree murder. On August 23, 2018, the court sentenced him to life in prison without parole and ordered him to pay $150,000 in restitution for Elizabeth's death. However, the story does not end there. In September 2020, the Iowa Court of Appeals changed Michael Cyperta's conviction from first-degree murder to second-degree murder. Judge Mary Tabor, in a 30-page ruling, noted that while there was enough evidence to conclude that Elizabeth was dead and that Michael was responsible, the prosecutor failed to prove that Michael intended to kill Elizabeth. This led to the reduced charge. The case was particularly difficult because there was no body, weapon, or crime scene. Michael asked to be released or at least given a new trial. Ultimately, the court sentenced Michael Cyperta to 50 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years.